Chapter 796. When he opened his eyes, Roland felt a weight on his arm. He gently turned his head, and Anna's calm and peaceful sleeping face came into view. She was lying on her side, her head in the crook of his arm, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised, as if she was having a sweet dream. Fortunately, he could still leave the dream world in this way. Roland carefully pulled his arm out, turned over, and got up. After covering Anna with the quilt, he quietly left the room. As he walked down the stairs, the soldiers stationed at the entrance of the corridor hurriedly stood up and saluted him. He waved his hand, indicating that they did not need to pay attention to him, and walked step by step to the hall on the first floor. Then Roland saw Phyllis. Phyllis stood in the middle of the hall with a trace of disappointment on her face. She lowered her head and repeatedly looked at her clenched hands, as if she was still reminiscing the moment when her body regained its sense of touch. It seemed that the answer was the former. The dream world was still under the control of his consciousness. When he woke up, the world would be still, and outsiders who entered would be forcibly expelled. "Your Majesty," seeing Roland, she pursed her lips and tried to squeeze out a smile. "I've woken up from my dream." It was obvious that for a moment, the god's punishment which would rather be trapped in the dream world forever. She had no choice but to transform into an immortal in order to continue fighting against the demons. However, the price she had to pay had become more and more expensive as time went by. Now, faced with the temptation of a new world, it was not surprising that she was wavering. But in the end, she suppressed this emotion. Maybe it was for the sake of her tequila compatriots, or maybe it was because of her obsession with the demons, or maybe it was both. But no matter what, her strong self-discipline made Roland secretly admire her. "It's not certain yet," he said with a smile. "The test is only half done. We have to confirm the second half to know if this is a coincidence or something inevitable after the light beams overlap. Let's continue here." Phyllis was slightly surprised. "Aren't you going back to your bedroom?" "I don't want to wake up Anna." Roland shook his head. "Anyway, there's heating in the castle. Sleeping in the living room is the same." He summoned one of his personal guards and gave him a few orders. The latter's eyes widened in surprise, but he still faithfully carried out his orders. After a quarter of an hour, the long table in the living room was covered with a layer of soft cushions and bedding. In this way, a group of confused soldiers guarded the living room tightly, leaving only Roland inside. Phyllis and the others stayed in the hall, waiting for the light pillar to appear. It had to be said that falling asleep for the second time was indeed more difficult, especially when the answer to the riddle was revealed. Roland tossed and turned for a long time, and only fell asleep when the sky began to brighten. The operation of the new world instantly resumed. To his surprise, the time in the dream was not forcibly moved to the next morning. The colorful neon night scene was still outside the window, and the ladder was still placed at the head of the bed. Phyllis's eyes were gradually regaining their luster. Then, as if she suddenly woke up from her daze, she looked down at Roland in disbelief. "Your Majesty, is this true? I'm not dreaming, am I?" He could not help curling the corner of his mouth. The answer was self-evident. What was a dream and what was reality might no longer be important to the god's punishment witches. What was important was that after hundreds of years of suffering and responsibility, she finally received her reward. This time, the two only stayed in the dream world for a very short time. Roland had thought that she would eagerly go out and take a stroll, but the first thing she did was to kneel on one knee and beg him to allow her to tell the other companions the news. The tequila survivors would always remember his kindness and do their best to serve him. In the face of this plea, Roland did not immediately respond, which was rare. It was not that he had a problem with the tequila witches, but he did not know how to feed so many witches. More importantly, Phyllis alone was enough to arouse Zero's suspicions. He could not say that the more than 100 witches were his distant relatives. As the second creator of the dream world, Roland did not want to involve the little girl in these things. If she found out that there was something wrong with this world, it was hard to predict what would happen. Based on the principle of precaution, the tequila witches must not stay at home. So he needed a place for many witches to live, such as an apartment, plus daily expenses, such as food and clothing, which would obviously cost a lot. After thinking for a while, Roland finally decided to let the witches solve this problem by themselves. The moment of silence probably made Phyllis misunderstand his meaning. She bit her lip, folded her other leg, knelt on both knees and begged again. This gesture had exceeded the boundary of the Tequila Witches' etiquette, which was only performed by ordinary people when they met the higher-ups of the Union. Roland tried to pull her up, but she insisted, only begging him not to keep her companions out of the door of the new world. Only then did he realize that Phyllis had misunderstood him. Not knowing whether to laugh or cry, he slowly explained his plan. Phyllis let out a long sigh of relief. In fact, for Roland, accepting the tequila survivors was not a difficult choice as she had thought. In the dream world, they were not a group of God's punishment soldiers with brute force, but witches with various magical abilities, and they would not be restricted by the God's stone of retaliation. With this group of helpers, putting aside the fact that his methods and efficiency of exploring Dreamscape would increase exponentially, just having them help him memorize and transcribe knowledge would benefit him greatly. In the long run, they might also be able to learn various kinds of knowledge and use modern equipment to study the nature of magic power. Of course, the most important thing was that even after the end of the Battle of Divine Will, the Tequila Witches could still find a place to stay in the new world. After leaving the dream world, Phyllis did not even wait for the sky to completely brighten. She hurriedly said goodbye to Roland and ran excitedly to the second border city. Roland yawned and returned to his bedroom. He crawled into the warm quilt and held Anna in his arms again. At this time, the girl also opened her sleepy eyes and mumbled, "You woke up so early today?" "Yes, I went for a stroll in the dream world." He kissed her forehead. "Then I encountered something unexpected, and I couldn't sleep after that." Oh, the girl's breath was like a soft feather, gently gliding on his neck. Was it a good dream? Chapter 797. Anna stayed close to Roland and listened to the whole story of the God's punishment witch's accidental entry into the dream world. So they can all find their lost feelings and return to normal lives? She heaved a sigh of relief. Her tone was mostly filled with happiness, but there was also a hint of melancholy and regret. "That's great. If only I could see the world you once lived in." "Only by turning your soul into a beam of light can you do that. It's too much of a price for you." Roland stroked her hair and earlobes. "Moreover, we can build Neverwinter into the ideal city and make reality as good as the dream world, right?" "That's right." Anna chuckled. "But don't you feel a little guilty now?" "Huh." Roland was stunned. "No, I just..." "You don't have to answer. Just let me listen." The girl put her head on his chest. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Well, I feel a little guilty and a little worried. The guilty part is because Phyllis is a beautiful woman, and the worried part is because she doesn't want me to think too much. Am I right?" Faced with this extremely correct statement, Roland did not know what to say for a moment. Anna burst into laughter. "But there's still 70% honesty. So you're worrying too much." "Don't worry." She paused and said in a serious tone, "Roland, you made this decision to help them, just like you did to save me and the Witch Cooperation Association. How can I be bothered by such a small thing? This is the duty of a king, isn't it?" Roland let out a sigh of relief. If it were Nightingale, he wouldn't be able to guarantee that she wouldn't let her imagination run wild. But Anna was different. She said that she believed him, and she really believed him. Roland could tell from her expression that she wholeheartedly supported the idea of giving the Tequila Witches a home and helping them regain their lost consciousness. Anna's kindness was part of her nature. This had never changed since the day she met her. "But after this, you have to tell me everything you do in your dreams, understand?" She blinked her lake blue eyes and whispered in his ear. Roland nodded. "I promise." Anna revealed a satisfied smile and slowly climbed onto his body. She held his cheeks with both hands and said, "Then for the rest of the time, you belong to me." The girl gently bit his collar and moved downwards. The sound of their sweet panting could be heard in the bedroom. On the other side, when the shocking news brought back by Phyllis spread, the third border city was in an uproar. "As long as I interrupt my consciousness within the range of the beam of light, I can regain my original appearance." That's not important at all. The key is that I can recover my sense of touch and smell. Is Kaifeng cuisine really that good? How does it compare to honey barbecue? Can you take me to the dream world to have a look? Me too. I want to go too. The crowd gathered around Phyllis and shouted at the same time. They were not as calm as usual. They were not so excited even when the demonic beasts invaded the underground labyrinth. Stop arguing. With so many of us going to the castle, people will think that we're going to seize Neverwinter. Alethea shouted and put a tentacle on Pasha's body. What do you think? Is this a trap set by the king of the common people? Even if it's a trap, I'm afraid they're willing to step into it. Pasha smiled helplessly. Until now, she had not recovered from the shock of Phyllis's story. A highly developed dream world, a place where souls could be reborn, was an almost immeasurable temptation for the tequila survivors. They had been searching for a way to fight against the demons, and they had finally found the answer from the mortal king. When hundreds of years of suffering were ushered in overnight, this surreal feeling gave her a rare sense of dizziness. She had not had a dream for a long time. Subconsciously, Pasha hoped that all this was true, but she could not fully believe that such a good thing would happen. A common person without magic power became the savior of the tequila witches? No wonder Alethea was full of vigilance and suspicion. Fortunately, she still knew that whether what Phyllis said was true or not, she had to send someone to verify it before making a conclusion. It was not that she did not believe Phyllis. After the break and the escape, everyone who survived was as close as a brother. She was just worried that Phyllis had been deceived. After all, this sounded like a dream from the Arabian Nights. No matter how carefully they examined it, it would not be too much. Thinking of this, Pasha transmitted her consciousness to everyone's mind. Is His Majesty really willing to let others enter the dream world? He did say so, but not now, Phyllis explained. That world has rules that must be followed, just like the real world. Therefore, in order to avoid unnecessary changes, the first batch of people can only enter. They will take on the task of pioneers, and lay the foundation for more people to enter the dream world in the future. Pasha was a little relieved. If it was a trap, the more people who stepped into it, the better, so that the pioneers would not have a chance to warn after discovering the flaw. What kind of requirements? Well, Phyllis hesitated for a moment. He needs witches who can act fast, sneak in, control, and attack. In other words, what he needs are combat witches. Alethea questioned. But didn't you say that the power in that world is far above that of the demons? Isn't his request a little too contradictory? He doesn't want us to fight against the whole world, but what? Do some looting in private, Phyllis said with some embarrassment. Of course, the targets are all unforgivable people. There was a brief silence. Wait a minute, does he think we're hooligans? We are dignified. Before Alethea could finish her words, her voice was overwhelmed by the noise of the crowd. That sounds interesting. Those guys don't have God's stone of retaliation, do they? Is there anyone who can block my continuous fireballs? You're making too much noise. What His Majesty needs is silence. My shadow-flying dagger is very good. You can only shoot for 10 steps, so don't talk about strong offensive ability. I can cover the whereabouts of my teammates. Let me go. Chapter 798. The worries and doubts of the senior witches only lasted for about a day, before they were completely dispelled by the subsequent news. Everything Phyllis had said was true. The third border city was in an uproar. In this case, even if Alethea was reluctant, she could not stop people from yearning for the dream world. At this point, it was obvious what the tequila should do. Pasha had a meeting with Roland about the covenant through the phantom instrument. The gods' punishment witches who stayed underground walked through the light curtain one by one, and raised their elbows to the Lord of Neverwinter, the King of Grey Castle, to acknowledge him as the only leader of the United Front. After that, the senior witches who had been transformed into original carriers lowered their main tentacles to show their loyalty. This was a courtesy that only the 3 chiefs of the Union could receive. It represented that after more than 400 years, the tequila had a mortal ruler. Alethea was the last to appear in front of the light curtain. Pasha had always been worried that Alethea, who had joined the Blessed Army at the age of 20 and fought against the demons for more than 10 years to defend the glory of tequila, would do something unexpected. But in the end, she still put the battle of divine will and the expectations of her companions first, and bent her main tentacle to Roland. No matter how reluctant she was at the moment, Pasha was still gratified by her decision to focus on the overall situation. If it were in the tequila era, this would definitely be an incredible scene. However, more than 400 years was long enough to change a lot of things. The ambition and firm belief that all human beings under the leadership of witches will defeat the demons were gradually worn out. When a mortal showed his amazing potential and had the grace of redemption for the tequila survivors, some meaningless persistence was obviously not so important anymore. Moreover, Pasha believed that the three chiefs of the Union agreed that witches would eventually stand out from the human community. After all, there were only a few mortals like Roland, and witches would one day return to the position of leader. However, by that time, the relationship between witches and mortals was bound to be much more harmonious than in the tequila era. After all, if they could safely survive the third battle of divine will, the idea that witches and mortals could only cooperate to exert their greatest power would undoubtedly be deeply rooted in people's hearts. She did not mind seeing such a future. By the time Roland actually carried out his plundering plan, 3 days had already passed. To ensure that Zero would not notice anything unusual, he rented a warehouse near the tube-shaped apartment and used it as a temporary landing point for witches to connect to the dream world. As long as the witches gathered here before he interrupted the dream, the next time he entered, they would still appear in the warehouse. Of course, the first connection would inevitably occur in apartment 0825 of the tube-shaped building. Roland could not figure this out no matter how hard he thought about it. It was probably because of Zero that this apartment became the key point connecting the outside world and the dream world. Therefore, every time he entered the dream world, he had to calculate the time and wait until Zero left for school before he connected the witches to the dream world. During these 3 days, Roland selected 4 gods' punishment witches, including Phyllis as the first batch of pioneers. For the first 2 days, he could still buy some fast food and drinks to satisfy their extremely strong desire to eat and drink, but on the 3rd day, he could only buy instant noodles and mineral water. But even so, they still ate with relish. Looking at their posture, they almost flipped the seasoning bag over and licked it again. In fact, it was not that they did not have this idea, but Roland stopped them. Otherwise, it would be too embarrassing for the United Front. As the savings in his hands were getting smaller and smaller, he had to carry out the plan. When night fell, Roland told Zero that he would be home late with the excuse of working overtime. Then he took the 4 witches to the villa area outside the 3rd ring road in 2 taxis. These days, they did not just stay in the warehouse to eat and drink. As a former member of the Quest Society, Faldi had a very strong detection ability. She could create a magic worm nest and connect the moths, bees and other insects that were attracted to her consciousness. The flying insects that were released would then spontaneously search for other sources of magic. This method was extremely effective in preventing sneak attacks from demons, and could also be used to search for areas that were difficult for ordinary people to enter. Although they could not provide Faldi with vision, they could allow her to sense the type and size of magic power, including the force of nature. After 3 days of searching, she found more than 10 sources of magic power, including Garcia, who lived in 0827. After eliminating the same type of magic power, there were 6 targets left. Among the 6 targets, the one who lived in the villa area was obviously the most valuable. This was Roland's plan, to search for those fallen evils through highly effective magic power detection, and then take their force of nature and property as his. These mutated monsters would not easily leave their habitats, so even if they were killed, it would not attract the attention of the neighbors. Moreover, even if the bodies were found by the police, the case would be transferred to the Martialist Association. At that time, the association would only think that this case was the work of another group of awakened with ulterior motives, and would not think that a group of superpower bandits had suddenly appeared in the city. After getting out of the car, they went to a dark corner and surrounded Donnan. Donnan summoned the lightless curtain and wrapped them up. This magical ability could make her companions disappear without a trace within the range of the curtain. It looked as if they were invisible, but its actual function was much more than that. Not only vision, smell, and magic power could also be blocked. Apart from direct contact, it was almost impossible to detect the existence of the person in hiding. In order to achieve the effect of a surprise attack, Donnan was undoubtedly a key person. Under Faldy's guidance, the five of them openly passed through the main gate and walked all the way to the foothills behind the villa area. This was the residential area of the city's rich. Most of the villas were built along the mountains, and the gardens were very spacious. At night, there was basically no one moving around, so it was really an excellent place to do something. We're here. The target is inside. Faldy stopped and pointed to a large courtyard by the road. The area of the front yard alone was almost the size of a tube-shaped apartment. These damn rich people are really enviable. Roland glanced at the flashing red surveillance camera at the entrance of the courtyard and turned to look at the robbers. No, the last member of the pioneer group. Ling, I'll leave the infiltration task to you. Do it according to the previous practice. Ling nodded and slowly disappeared into the shadows as if she was sinking. Although there were no witches among the tequila survivors like Nightingale or Maggie, who could ignore all obstacles as if they were nothing, Ling's ability could basically meet the basic requirements. As long as there was a shadow, she could blend in and move freely like water. Especially at night, when the large expanse of shadows connected into an endless stretch, the entire front yard became her territory. Naturally, it was not difficult for her to pass through the gaps between the doors and windows. Chapter 799. Good job. Roland waved his hand at the rippling shadow that had entered the range of the curtain. A smiling face emerged from the dark shadow, as if it was responding to his encouragement. If Roland did not know that there was a witch hiding in the shadow, he would have screamed at the sight of it. Your Majesty, the enemy is in the hall. The reaction is very strong, and its magic power is close to that of a large demonic hybrid, Faldy reminded. Is it difficult? Don't worry. As long as it's not an enemy like a senior demon, Ling and I can handle it, Phyllis said. Then let's act according to plan. After passing through the long porch, Roland found that the windows around the villa were covered with foam boards and tape. There were only a few lights on, and the whole hall was quite dim. The air conditioner was turned on very low, as if they had stepped into winter from early autumn. The air was filled with a disgusting smell of decay. A man in a suit stood motionless in the middle of the hall. Obviously, he was their target. The moment he stepped into the hall, Roland felt a warm current rapidly expanding in his body. The feeling was several times stronger than when he met the masked man. It seemed that Faldy had caught a big fish. But what caught his attention was the huge statue of a monster hanging on the two-story wall that the man was facing. At first glance, the material of the statue looked like wood, but also like dried leather. It had a humanoid face, but it had a pair of wings. Its thick hind legs and slender front claws curled in front of its body seemed to be a complete mismatch. The monster was nearly 4 meters tall, and the patterns on its feathers and skin were vivid. It was obviously very valuable. Rich people have a bad taste, Roland muttered to himself. Just by looking at the craftsmanship, this thing was at least worth $1 million. Let's do it. He withdrew his gaze and focused on the target. Yes. Phyllis used the lightless curtain to approach the back of the enemy about 2 meters away, and launched the first attack. The bone claws stretched out from her back and slashed at the man in the suit with lightning speed. The interference of magic power caused the curtain to ripple. The man seemed to sense something and suddenly turned his head. But at this distance, even an extraordinary could not dodge. Almost at the same time, the bone claws cut through the man's neck and came out from his waist, slanting diagonally and cutting him into two. The enemy opened his eyes wide and fell to the ground in disbelief. Dark red blood splashed on the ground. It seemed that even without removing its natural core, a fallen evil could not survive as long as its body was seriously injured. That's it. Ling poked her head out from the shadow beside the sofa. The looting is the most important, Roland said while covering his nose. He did not know if it was an illusion, but the rancid smell in the air became stronger. Do you remember what I taught you before? Gold jewelry, red paper, and a metal box with a round plate. Ling raised her hand. The coins are worthless. Don't worry about the gemstones. That's right, especially the red paper. The more the better. According to his experience of plundering the holy city of Hermes, the price of gems fluctuated too much, and it was difficult to sell them at a reasonable second-hand price. They were far less stable than gold. Of course, cash is the best. Roland thought. I hope this guy is not an online shopping enthusiast. Just as Roland squatted down and was about to transform the force of nature embedded in the belly of the man in the suit, Faldy suddenly frowned and said, Wait. Why is the magic reaction still there? What? The other three were slightly stunned. The origin of magic did not disappear. Instead, it is growing. She looked around as if she was looking for something, and then her eyes fell on the statue. Damn, this monster is alive. As soon as she finished speaking, the statue suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a frog-like tongue, stabbing straight at Roland. Be careful, Your Majesty. Phyllis did not hesitate to block in front of him. At the same time, her two bony claws clawed at the direction of the tongue. However, Roland was no longer the same as before. He could clearly see the trajectory of the monster's attack. He grabbed Phyllis by the waist and rolled to the side, avoiding the long tongue that shot towards them like an arrow. The monster's tongue directly pierced through the corpse on the ground, then wrapped around the nature core. With a forceful pull, the red core immediately flew towards the statue's mouth. Roland noticed that the force of nature, which was originally in a frozen state, began to spin again upon contact with the monster. Following the movement of the monster, a large swarm of insects flew out from behind it and fled in all directions in a panic. It was obvious that they were attracted by the other's magic. However, as they could not share their vision, Faldy could not tell that the magic reaction in the hall came from two different targets. Ha! Look what I saw, a group of martial artists coming to me? The statue swallowed the core in one gulp and actually spoke. You bunch of thieves who steal power. You shouldn't even exist in the holy domain. All of you die. It raised its neck, as if taking a deep breath, and then spat out a mouthful of scarlet breath at the people in the hall. It was actually pure magic power. In an instant, the furniture in the hall was torn to pieces, and the lightless curtain was broken by this wave of attack. Donnan and Faldy, who were hiding in the hall, had several bloody wounds on their bodies and fell heavily to the ground. Fortunately, they had avoided the center of the area where the magic power was the most violent, so they did not fall apart like the furniture. Roland was in a much better state. When the magic power attacked, the warm current in his body spread to his whole body in the blink of an eye and protected his vital parts like armor. But what kind of attack is this? Roland was astonished. This was completely different from the witch's ability. He had never seen this kind of attack that directly turned magic power into damaging energy. Ever since he obtained this strange power, he had become more familiar with the aura of magic power. This attack was definitely not something that a fallen evil could do. The witches were also astonished, which meant that the monster's understanding of magic power was on a higher level than theirs. Its magic reaction is close to that of a senior demon. Faldy gritted her teeth. How is this possible? Demon? Is this how you address us? The monster grinned coldly. It easily broke the rivets that held its wings in place, jumped down from the wall, and squatted in front of them like a gargoyle. Stealing power from the sacred realm without permission, and now you call the pursuers demons? How stupid. Sacred realm? Pursuers? Roland could not help but frown. What was it referring to? At this moment, a black light jumped out from the shadow behind the monster and flew past its cheek. It was the figure of Ling. With a crisp crack, a dagger pierced through the monster's eye and came out from the other side, piercing through its head. Ling did not stop after succeeding. The moment she landed, she hid in the shadow again. The whole sneak attack was as smooth as flowing water. Well done. Phyllis clenched her fists. Well done. However, the monster did not collapse like the fallen evils. Cracks appeared on its wood-like face, and its dry voice sounded cold and emotionless. Do you think you can hurt me with this ordinary iron and insignificant magic power? You have no idea what the sacred realm means. Now, I'll show you the true power of my master. As it spoke, a series of cracking sounds came one after another. The cracks rapidly spread from its face to its whole body. And then the dull shell turned into pieces and peeled off from its body. A dark red light bloomed under the wooden shell, as if it was flowing scarlet blood. When it completely revealed its true body, Roland opened his mouth wide in surprise. Hidden under the shell was a body made of pure magic power. Clusters of stars flickered incessantly in its body, and finally converged into a huge astrolabe in front of its chest. Chapter 800. Who's your master? Roland felt that this creature was much more emotional than the fallen evils, so he might be able to get more information from it by asking a few more questions. At the same time, he gestured to the wounded Faldi and Donnan to leave this place as soon as possible. If he was forced into a passive situation and needed to escape, he would be faster than these witches. It's the son of omnipotence, an existence that you can't understand. It spread its wings that were emitting a red light, and pressed its hand on the ground. Playing tricks are meaningless here. You want them to escape now? It's too late. Scarlet blood flowed from its body and quickly spread throughout the room. In the blink of an eye, the floor, walls, and roof of the hall were all dyed red. Ling, who had lost her hiding place, was directly bounced out of the wall and fell beside Phyllis. What's this? Faldi's low voice came from behind. Roland turned around and saw tentacles with small claws stretching out from the red and black void, firmly trapping the witch's hands and feet. He seemed to have seen those tentacles somewhere before. But now that the situation had suddenly taken a turn for the worse, he had no time to think too much. A warm current ran wildly in his body. Roland gathered all his strength and rushed toward the strange enemy in front of him. Oh, you're not affected? The magic monster was stunned and opened its palm. What about this? A powerful force shot out from its palm and sent Roland flying. The force was so great that it felt like a hammer had hit him, and he finally crashed into the wall. With a muffled sound, he felt a burning sensation on his back, as if his internal organs had been displaced. Ahem. He could not help coughing and tasted a sweet fishy taste in his throat. Your Majesty! Phyllis cried anxiously. At this moment, she was the only one besides Roland who could move. The blade claws on her back danced up and down, cutting off the tentacles that stretched out from the ground. But the tentacles were endless, so she could not get close to him in a short time. This was the most critical moment. But Roland's mind was unexpectedly clear. There was no fear in his heart, as if the feeling of fear had been removed from his brain. The warm current flowed faster and faster. Accompanied by a powerful heartbeat, he felt incredible changes taking place in his body. The magic of the world was closing in on him. Even the streams of light that covered the walls became sluggish, and the scarlet lines of blood that flowed past him automatically avoided his body. And the places that he touched actually had a tinge of blue appear in the dark red. This process was completely out of his control, and he had no idea what was happening. A voice kept echoing in his ears, and the chaotic shouts gradually became one. Kill it, kill it. The monster also noticed that something was wrong. There was finally a slight fluctuation in its dry voice. What's going on? What did you do to the magic? Roland did not answer. He felt that the warm current had expanded to its limit. His body almost subconsciously bent his knees and kicked the wall. The next moment, he shot straight at the enemy like a cannonball. Die! The monster used the same trick, and reached out to push him again. But this time, Roland was not knocked down by the huge force. For the first time, he saw the warm current rushing out of his body, forming a blue light screen in front of him. The two collided, and a dazzling light burst out. Then he flew straight into the monster's arms against the stream of light. He punched. There was no expected collision. His fist felt like it had punched a ball of soft liquid. He saw his arm sink into the monster's body, just a finger away from the star jades. Roland gritted his teeth, opened his fingers, and grabbed the most eye-catching star chart on the monster's chest. The monster suddenly let out a deafening roar. No. This is the master's power. How could you touch it? The galaxy-like disk began to tremble and gradually turned from a rich crimson color to a bluish-white color. However, this process was extremely slow and repeated from time to time. Roland felt as if he was competing with a raging bull. Fortunately, more and more magic gathered around him, and the whole world seemed to merge with him. So that's how it is. I understand. A whirlpool-like eye opened on top of the monster's head. You are the culprit who created this world. You are the one who made the master unable to bear the burden. He is already known as the omniscient. How can he still be affected by me? Roland sneered. You don't know anything. Master is omnipotent, but he can't stop all of this himself. Go back, don't come here again. Your actions are destroying everything. Hiss hiss. Not only you, but all living things, hiss, will end because of you. Its voice became more and more indistinct, as if it was seriously disturbed. Roland felt that the resistance of the star chart was weakening, and the process of turning from red to white was getting faster. All living beings will be terminated? He turned back to look at the weak witch sitting on the ground and said in a deep voice, No, the only ones that will be terminated are all of you. I don't know where you came from, or what your intentions are, but without a doubt, this world will be better without you. From Eevees. Bottomless land. No idea. Bisty TV. This is the rule. The monster's words could no longer form a complete sentence. Furthermore, Roland noticed that it was no longer as emotional as before. Its voice had turned flat and monotonous, as though it was a machine that had a fixed answer. When it said the last sentence, the resistance in Roland's hand instantly vanished. The star chart spun rapidly, attracting the surrounding star jades before converging into an extremely dazzling white light. For a moment, Roland seemed to hear the heartbeat of the earth. The scene of magic power spewing out this time was far better than the previous 2 times. The monster curled up into a spherical body, and a silver-white pillar of light bloomed from it, shooting straight to the ceiling for a long time. Standing in front of this light, Roland felt an indescribable satisfaction. The pleasure his body received exceeded the sum of the previous 2 times. Nothing could compare to it. The witch's injuries weren't too serious. She had only exhausted her magic power, and could barely walk on her own. According to Phyllis, when he was in a stalemate with the monster, the magic power of the 4 people had been absorbed by it. This was something that was almost impossible in the real world. However, he had already encountered so many unimaginable changes in a single night, so one more did not matter. Chapter 801. Thanks to the craze of learning how to drive in college, Roland signed up with his classmates. He did not expect that the first time he touched a steering wheel after leaving the driving school would be in the dream world. Your Majesty, what was that monster? Faldi asked weakly. Can a fallen evil also possess such great power? Theoretically speaking, it doesn't make sense that her magic power could be greatly enhanced in such a short time. She and Donnan were the most affected when they dodged the first magic attack. Half of Roland's beautiful purple curly hair was cut off. Fortunately, none of the wounds were fatal. Most of them avoided her head and torso. In other words, she chose the most appropriate way of dodging when facing the messy magic attacks. Roland had to admit that the survivors of Tequila were all experienced fighters. Even a witch who was not a combat type could perform so well. It was also thanks to this that the first exploration operation did not end in failure. Although he did not know what would happen if he died in the dream world, Roland hoped that he would never have to test this question. Has the Union never had a similar ability? Of course. The so-called backlash is caused by the loss of magic power to the body, Faldi gasped. If a witch continuously practices to increase the amount of magic power stored, the body will also adapt to this kind of damage, and the speed of recovery won't drop too much. Whether it's us, the demons, or those hybrid demonic beasts, we can only slowly improve our magic power. I see, Roland thought. This is the first time that she has seen a living creature made of pure magic power. In her mind, all living creatures should have flesh and bones. Therefore, when she encountered this kind of enemy that she had never seen before, she was naturally puzzled. He did not have such doubts. Ever since the monster revealed its jelly-like translucent body, he had already assumed it to be a spirit or an elemental creature. Since it was constructed from mana, it would naturally not be harmed by mana. However, this question was not easy to explain, and his guess was not necessarily correct. Especially when the blue light in its body prevailed. Its obviously declining emotions and consciousness could not be classified as a living creature. In the end, Roland just shook his head and said, I don't know what it is, but one thing is for sure, it's definitely not a fallen evil. Are there many such monsters in the dream world? Ling, who was the smallest among them, was still frightened. When the shadow in the room was covered by the black and red void, I felt like my whole body was frozen, as if something extremely terrible was staring at me. I swear, even the senior demons were not so terrible. I don't think there are too many of them. Otherwise, the dream world would have been occupied by them, Roland comforted. The Darksiders could not be harmed by ordinary force, so they could only leave it to the Martialist Association to deal with. However, against such a monster, even a dozen or so Martialists working together might not necessarily be able to win, and if there were too many of them, the association would be destroyed. Now he was sure that the external erosion had something to do with the bloody moon. The tentacles that stretched out of the void were exactly the same as what he had seen in the realm. But why did the bloody moon erode the dream world? Shouldn't this world be a part of the bloody moon? Who was the master that the monster mentioned? Was it God or the source of magic power? If it really rejected the dream world, why did it remain silent when it was connected to the relic of the gods? In addition, the bottomless land that the monster mentioned at the end also caught Roland's attention. Perhaps it was due to the assimilation of the language, but the structure of the word was similar to the Land of Dawn. Only when it referred to the entire continent would the suffix appear. It was just like the realm of gods. Although the meaning was similar, it was expressed in a different way. If the bloody moon had been watching the real world because of the battle of divine will, would the information it revealed be referring to a continent in the real world, just as he had understood? These questions could only be answered by the explorers. Of course, not all the witches were thinking about the battle that had just taken place. Phyllis, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, had completely forgotten the solemn mood after the battle. She showed great interest in operating the luxury car. Previously, when they were in the taxi, she had kept silent according to Roland's instructions. Now she could no longer suppress her exuberant curiosity. She stared at Roland without blinking, as if she wanted to memorize his every move. Do you want to learn how to drive? Roland asked her with a smile, putting the distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. Phyllis immediately nodded her head. Then we have to do a few more jobs. He took the opportunity to tempt her. By then, not only will we be able to enjoy different delicacies every day, but we will also have our own bedrooms and private cars. There's something more delicious than kaifeng dishes and hot pot? Faldi interrupted. That's just for beginners. When you have money, you'll find that even if you eat nonstop every day, you can't taste all the delicacies in the world. Even without looking back, Roland could feel the scorching eyes of the witches behind him. Then when Dawnin recovers, let's go to the next one. I've marked its location. Faldi's voice was still not loud, but she sounded much less weak. I'll be fine. I'll set off tomorrow after I recover my magic power. The petite Dawnin was more enthusiastic. This injury is nothing. Even Ling, who had been a little scared, was moved by this temptation. Although she did not agree with the others, her eyes were sparkling in the rearview mirror. Roland could not help sighing with emotion. It turned out that it was so easy to improve morale. In order to avoid the police, he did not drive directly into Tongzi Street. Instead, he parked the car next to the Clover Group's construction site. The area was still under demolition, and was basically a surveillance blind area. He could easily return to the rented warehouse by taking a detour. After that, it was time to check the loot. Unfortunately, there was not much cash in the safe, only about 100,000 yuan. There were a lot of jewelry, but it turned out that they were either made of jade or jewelry. It was unknown how much they were worth. To his surprise, he also found a lot of solidified force of nature. It was because the safe was full of these small but exceptionally heavy things that he had the illusion that he had gained a lot from this trip. Did it mean that banknotes were no longer the fashion for these fellows to make transactions, and they had switched to using the force of nature as their equivalent currency? When Roland returned to 0827, It was already 11:30 at night. He opened the door quietly and found that the light in the living room was still on. Zero was lying by the coffee table, her curved back slightly moving up and down as if she had fallen asleep. There was a stack of books and a pencil case in front of the little girl. Apparently, she had been reviewing her lessons while waiting for him to come back. The two of them were clearly just tenant and landlord, but now they seemed to be a family. Looking at this scene, Roland could not help but feel a touch of tenderness in his heart. He walked forward and gently picked up Zero, put her back on the bed in the bedroom, took off her shoes, and covered her with the quilt. Oh, and the textbook. If she forgot to bring it to class tomorrow, she would definitely blame me again. Roland smiled and shook his head. He took the books on the coffee table and folded them on Zero's desk. Just then, the bold words on the cover of the textbook caught his attention. Junior High School Mathematical Olympiad. This was an extracurricular subject that looked sophisticated, but was particularly impractical. He remembered that he was not very interested in mathematics when he was in junior high school. At that time, he thought that Mathematical Olympiad was the upgraded version of mathematics, so he kept a respectful distance from it. He would rather learn drawing and calligraphy during the summer vacation than participate in the Mathematical Olympiad class. Therefore, he naturally did not know what was taught in this course. However, just now he saw that the textbook was not blank. Roland suddenly felt his breath quicken. He took a deep breath and slowly reached out to open the first page of the textbook. Chapter 802. A flat and spacious stone boat slowly sailed into Clearwater Bay and docked in front of Simbadi. Its size was vastly different from that of the small boats that occasionally appeared in Silverstream. It was so heavy that it could hardly be rowed by a human. Two metal cylinders stood at the top of the boat, from which white smoke billowed out. The sides of the boat were painted an eye-catching orange-red color. Together with the flat gray deck, it looked like a red trout with its belly turned upside down. Simbadi, like most of his compatriots, had never been out of the desert and rarely seen the sea. Therefore, when he saw such a boat that was obviously not made of wood, he could not help but exclaim in surprise. There was a sudden commotion in the crowd. Crack! The OSHA watchman immediately cracked his whip on their heads. Shut your mouths. Now line up and get on the boat. Hurry up. Simbadi felt the crowd begin to move. People kept pushing and shoving him from behind. He could not stop even if he wanted to. Caught in the middle of the group boarding the ship, he suddenly felt a trace of fear in his heart. Perhaps he should not have left Silverstream Oasis and come to this strange land. Although there was a water source here that would never be cut off, the three gods could not see such a distant place. If this boat carried them to the Styx abyss, the gods would not hear their cries for help. Hold on tight. Watch your step. Don't miss anything. Molly's voice instantly brought him back to reality. A small hand clasped his hand and guided him to the gangplank. From time to time, people around him were pushed into the water, making splashing sounds. Although there were people at the dock who would quickly pull them ashore, falling into the river in this weather basically meant that they were disqualified. Those who fell into the water begged to get on the boat again, but they were answered by the whip. Simbadi and Molly stuck close to each other and followed the crowd to board the stone boat. The moment he stepped on the deck, the expected shaking did not happen. The boat under him did not move at all, as if he were walking on the ground. When the gangplank was removed, Thuram, the big shot of OSHA clan, appeared on the platform in the center of the boat, attracting everyone's attention. Do you remember what I said before? What the great chieftain valued the most was order and discipline. Look at your people who fell into the water. Everyone could have boarded the ship smoothly and got a job. They could have had plenty of food during the months of demons. But now they have to wait for their next job with an empty stomach. And all of this was caused by your foolishness. They just fell into the water. You can wait for them to change their clothes. A Sand Nation was pressed to the ground by two guards before he could finish his sentence. He was then dragged to the side of the boat and thrown into the water. Discipline is everything. There is no collective that accommodates individuals, only individuals that obey the collective. Thuram said sternly. What's different from the clan competition in the past is that those who were eliminated previously were your potential enemies. But now, those who will be eliminated will be your relatives. Remember this well. This is the first lesson I'm giving you. He paused for a moment. Of course, those who lost their jobs today will only starve for a while. In the future, if there are any Sand Nation or tribes who don't obey the rules, they will be driven out of this evergreen land. As his voice trailed off, a deep roar came out of the metal cylinder and rolled over the port of Clearwater. The huge iron wheels on both sides of the ship began to rotate slowly. The stone ship trembled violently and slowly left the shore, heading for the estuary of the river. Thank you. If it weren't for you. Simbadi looked at Molly. Molly smiled and her eyes curved into slits. Don't mind me. I just happened to be in front of you. Really? He lowered his head, feeling a little embarrassed. Molly and he were both members of the Fishbone clan, so they occasionally talked to each other. Simbadi had always liked this girl with long black braids and light brown eyes. However, it was said that she already had a sweetheart, so he did not show his affection to her. After a moment of silence, he looked at Molly, who was lying on the side of the ship and looking at the scenery on both sides of the river curiously. He could not help asking, "Aren't you worried about the place we're going to?" She turned around. The Blackwater Valley? Yes, I heard from other clans that it's close to the Choke Swamp and the Rotten Wasteland. It's a place cursed by the three gods. Once you stray into it, you won't be able to come back alive. Have they applied to board the ship? This. Molly couldn't help but laugh out loud. Those people just hope that the fewer people who get this job, the better. That way, their clans can get more pay. You heard Lady Drow Silvermoon say that as long as we do things according to the chief's instructions, not only will our families not have to worry about food and clothing, but the clan will also get resources. She exhaled a white breath. Besides, do we have any other choice? Her last words made Simbadi shut his mouth. Indeed, most of the clans who were willing to follow Osha to the southern region of Grey Castle were small tribes in the Silver Stream Oasis, and the Fishbone clan was one of them. The oasis they occupied was gradually being swallowed by the desert, and the increasingly dried-up Silver Stream tributary could no longer guarantee the survival of the clan. If they wanted to survive, they had to either join other large clans or venture to the southern region. On the bright side, at least the chief fulfilled his first promise. Now we don't have to worry about starving to death in the desert, right? Simbadi could not refute this. According to Lady Silvermoon, even those who did not get the job at sea could get the most basic rations. As long as they took on the menial tasks of rebuilding the southern region, they would not starve to death. Besides, the people of Osha will also go to the Blackwater Valley with us, so you don't have to worry too much. Molly smiled and pointed to the ruins of the port in the distance. Look over there. The land that our clan got should be near that black tower, right? It'd be great if we could live here forever. Simbadi looked in the direction she was pointing. The entire port of Clearwater seemed to have been divided into two halves. One half was burned ruins, with dilapidated houses and charred wooden frames everywhere. The walls and courtyards were crumbling and overgrown with weeds, as if it had been forgotten and deserted. The other half was full of vitality. The Sand Nation's tents were rising and falling, and people were moving around in the camp. Broken houses were being pulled down one by one, and newly peeled wood was being carried into the wasteland. Molly's smile made Simbadi's heart surge with anticipation. Perhaps when he returned to this place after 3 months of work, there would be brand new wooden houses around the Black Tower. The rebuilding town slowly receded until the ships began to rise and fall with the waves, and the endless skyline became the only scenery. Chapter 803. Is it really okay to do this? Echo looked through the window of the command post at the Sand Nation, who were being whipped and rolling on the ground, with a trace of pity on her face. They've never known what discipline is. Their life has always been one of survival of the fittest. If we want them to be put to use as soon as possible, this is the only way except for war. Iron Axe replied respectfully. You haven't been in the southernmost region for a long time, and the chief is very concerned about you. So you may not know the nature of these small clans. This kind of lesson is not a big deal, and can even be said to be very necessary. Otherwise, they will only think that Osha has no prestige and is weak and easy to bully. At this point he said with a rare hesitation, "I think you may not be used to it because His Majesty is sometimes too kind." "I totally agree." Andrea, who was lying by the window, shrugged. "There's a saying among the nobles that radishes and sticks are the best way to rule the subjects. And the thicker the radish, the kinder the lord is." "What's a radish?" Hummingbird asked curiously. "It's a kind of food similar to His Majesty's corn. It's a specialty of the Kingdom of Dawn," Andrea explained. "But no matter how sturdy a carrot is, it's still much thinner than a stick." So the implication of this sentence is that the subjects will only learn to cherish the punishment more than the reward. A lord like His Majesty will only be regarded as a wastrel in the City of Glow. "This is one of the few things that I agree with you." Ashes twitched her mouth. "Maybe His Majesty is very talkative?" Hummingbird put her chin on her hand and thought for a while. "The words he taught Thurum to say are quite reasonable. The collective strength is always greater than the individual strength. However, even Thurum only forced himself to memorize those words." Iron Axe shook his head with a smile. "If you hadn't been to Neverwinter in person, you wouldn't have been able to imagine what kind of incredible new order His Majesty had established. I believe that one day, the whole of Grey Castle will become like Neverwinter, but obviously not now. The whip can make them remember the rules of the southern region better than words." Echo sighed softly and did not say anything more. "Lord Commander-in-Chief," a soldier suddenly walked into the command center. "There's a commotion in the Rockfall tribe and the Clear Spring tribe. Someone is confronting the garrison army." "Because of boarding?" Iron Axe's expression immediately became serious. "Yes, those who were pushed into the water called their families, hoping to get the same amount of food and remuneration. It's not that they don't want to go to Blackwater Valley. It's just that OSHA refused them." "Very good. Who is guarding the camp now?" "2nd Firearm Battalion." "Call up 2 classes, as well as those OSHA lads who want to sign up for the 1st Army. Tell them to immediately gather at the site of the commotion. I'll be there soon." "Yes, my lord." Seeing that Iron Axe was about to leave, Echo couldn't help but call out to him. "Please don't be too harsh on them." The latter stood in the doorway in silence for a moment before placing a hand on his chest and bowing to her. "I understand. Lady Silvermoon, I will act appropriately." After Iron Axe left, Echo returned to the table gloomily. The northward migration of the Sand Nation did not go as smoothly as she had imagined. Obviously, as long as they followed His Majesty's arrangements, they would be able to live a good life. However, there were always people who took her words as lies. Even though they had obtained a fertile land, they still could not completely trust her and His Majesty. She somewhat missed her life in Neverwinter. Compared to being the head of the clan, she preferred to stand on the top of the castle, overlook the mountains and the city, and sing the songs composed by His Majesty. Only when she heard a melody that she had never heard before could she feel the real freedom and happiness. Since she came here, she had not sung for a long time. She wondered if His Majesty had written a new song. When would she be able to sing again? Wretch! Simbadi felt as if his stomach was churning. As the stone ship rose and fell, a gush of acid rose up again. Ignoring the vomit on both sides of the ship, he directly lay on the railing and opened his mouth to vomit. "Hey, are you okay?" Molly patted him on the back, her face a little pale. The stone ship, which had been like flat ground in the river bend, became a floating leaf in the sea. Battered by the waves, the ship almost crashed into the beach several times and never stopped swaying sideways. For the Sand Nation, who was in close contact with the sea for the first time, it was a complete torture. Ahem. "I'm barely okay." After vomiting, he weakly collapsed on the deck. "Do you remember how many days we've been on the sea?" "Today is the 5th day. Something's wrong." Simbadi gasped and whispered. "Do you remember what the Clear Spring clan said? They live in an oasis by the sea, so they shouldn't be wrong. We passed by the Iron Sand City on the first evening, which proves that the stone ship is not slow. But why haven't we arrived at the Blackwater Valley?" "You mean OSHA's destination isn't the Blackwater Valley." Thurum lied. "The place he's taking us to is much further south than the Choke Swamp." "Further south?" Mooley also revealed a worried look. "But there's nothing there. Could they have gotten the wrong way? The ship has been sailing along the coast, so it's unlikely that they got the wrong direction. Simbadi pressed his swollen forehead. If it's further south than the choke swamp, then it can only be. Everyone, keep your spirits up. Before he could finish, Thuram suddenly appeared in the middle of the deck and interrupted him. I have good news for you. We're about to arrive at our destination. Pack your bags and get ready to disembark. Remember, if anyone falls into the sea again, no one will come to rescue you. Simbadi propped himself up and looked out of the ship. The shore was still barren, and there was no sign of an oasis. His speculation was confirmed by the billowing water vapor and the billowing smoke column on the sea in the distance. There was only one place that could have such an incredible view: the endless cape, the place of exile of the Majins. More and more Sand Nations people noticed the anomaly, and the crowd on the deck became restless. This isn't the Blackwater Valley at all. Osha lied to us. Why did you bring us to the endless cape? Do you want to abandon us here? I want to go back. Please let us go back. All of you shut up. At this moment, Thuram had no intention of hiding anything. Did I say we were going to the central area of the Blackwater Valley? The tributaries of the valley are all over the south, including the Cape area. Any underground Styx River extends from the valley, isn't it? This is just sophistry. Simbadi thought angrily. If I had said I wanted to work in the land of exile, I'm afraid not many people would have applied. Chapter 804. The New City. Will be built in this place? Simbadi could hardly believe his ears. The silver stream became thinner and thinner as it went south. When it reached the Blackwater Valley, it was almost completely swallowed by the yellow sand, which was also the origin of the land of exile. How can we survive in this vast desert without water and oases? Thuram's words caused an uproar among the Sand Nation people, and more than one person raised the same question. We can make it ourselves, Thuram replied loudly. But before that, the vanguard has already found a water source. You'll see it when you get off the ship. Instead of subsiding, the uproar became louder. Make it, someone shouted. How? The silver stream is a gift from Mother Earth. How can we make it? 3 gods above, only the messenger of God can turn the desert into an oasis. If we can't do it, can we still go back to the southern region? Yes, you're not going to leave us here and go back alone, are you? Facing the doubts of the crowd, Thuram hesitated for the first time. Simbadi noticed that he secretly glanced at the people of Grey Castle behind him. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "The great chief is omnipotent. If he says he can make it, he can make it. You just have to obey his orders. And Lady Silvermoon has promised that if you can't make it happen, not only will you return to the port of Clearwater in advance, but you'll also get 3 months' pay." Saying this, he patted the whip on his waist. Of course, I won't leave in advance. If anyone wants to be lazy, be prepared to taste the iron whip. So that's how it is. Simbadi realized that Thuram was not the manager of this team. The people of Grey Castle standing behind him were the real masters. During the holy duel, he had heard more than once about the strength of this group of people. Unlike the Queen of Clearwater, they were not inferior to the warriors of the big clans even in a head-on battle. But this was the Endless Cape. Even if they could defeat the watchdogs overnight, they were just an insignificant part of the boundless sea of sand. Both the Northerners and the Great Chief had underestimated the power of the desert. Unfortunately, the people on the ship had no other choice. About an hour later, the stone boat slowly approached the shore. Simbadi dragged his tired body off the boat. Only when his feet landed on the soft sand did he feel relaxed, which he had not felt for a long time. Finally, the world no longer shook incessantly. Look, what's that? Molly pointed to the depths of the land. A sentry tower? He followed her gaze and saw a black iron frame standing in the middle of the yellow sand. It did not seem to be far from the shore, and there were 2 flags fluttering on top of it. One was bright red, and the other seemed to be embroidered with complicated patterns. Usually, Simbadi would have wondered why a girl he only talked to occasionally would stay with him. But now, he had no energy to think about it. Someone got here first. Let's go and take a look. Later. He shook his head. It's better to wait for Sir Thuram's instructions. Simbadi still remembered those Sand Nation people who had fallen into the water. He did not want his sweetheart to be whipped in public. Molly, I finally found you. His clansmen gradually gathered around. Simbadi, you're here too? I thought you fainted from vomiting on the ship. Haha. His words caused a burst of laughter. Simbadi lowered his head in embarrassment. He was indeed the weakest among his clansmen, whether it was in strength or courage. Usually he was fine being talked about by others, but in front of Molly, he suddenly felt a little embarrassed. In fact, during the few days at sea, he was even worse than Molly. Look, there's an iron tower. How did they move such a heavy thing here? Maybe it's a ship? I heard that the people of Grey Castle have a direct passage to the Endless Cape. Are we going to camp there tonight? Probably. The Endless Cape is much more dangerous than the Oasis. Someone must stay to guard it at night. There were more than 20 people from the Fishbone clan, which was the smallest group among all the clans, but it could be said that all the young and strong people had come. One of his peers, Carlone, was one of the best. He was tall and handsome. Not only was he good at martial arts, but he was also favored by the clan chief. His words attracted everyone's attention. I once participated in the exile of the Iron Sand City. The sandworms and scorpions here are much larger than those in the Oasis. It's even said that the giant armored scorpions, which dominate the land, are also active in this area. Therefore, we must be vigilant and try to set up tents as close to those people of Grey Castle as possible. Do you think what Sir Thuram said is true? Can the great chief really create a body of water in the desert? Someone asked. Probably not. Carlone smacked his lips. If he really has such an ability, he can become the ruler of the desert without a holy duel. There's no need for him to do this. Then what should we do? Everyone was in an uproar. Don't worry. The great chief won't spend so much effort just to throw us into exile. Carlone's calm voice was full of confidence. This operation may be just a whim. When the people of Grey Castle realize that it's impossible, our work will be over. As for the 3 months' salary, Osha will never deny it. That's right. Otherwise, no one will believe them. I'm relieved to hear that. As long as we can go back, everything will be fine. The clansmen all nodded, except for Simbadi. He agreed with the first half of Carlone's words, but had doubts about the second half. The people of Grey Castle had indeed underestimated the desert, and their plan to turn the Endless Cape into a town was doomed to fail. However, looking at the solemn-looking soldiers in uniform, Simbadi faintly felt that the great chief was not just saying it casually. At this time, some people began to move toward the Iron Tower. The team became scattered, but Thuram was still talking with the people of Grey Castle, seemingly indifferent to all this. Shall we also go there? A clansman suggested. You're right. Carlone nodded. If they really camp near the Iron Tower, we can get a good position if we go there earlier. Everyone follow me. He deliberately glanced at Molly and asked, Do you need me to carry your luggage? Molly hesitated and shook her head. Simbadi said it's better to wait for Sir Thuram's order. Didn't he always emphasize that we should obey the rules? It's not like we're staying on the ship and not getting off. Why does he have to care about this? Simbadi, are you frightened by the Endless Cape? He might still be in a coma. The clansman who had laughed at him before said sarcastically again. I'm just worried that. Simbadi raised his head and was about to defend himself when a rapid whistle interrupted their conversation. Chapter 805. Simbadi had thought it was just a bluff, but he did not expect them to be serious. When the Osha warriors began to carry out the order, a conflict broke out. More than 50 people who had left earlier were unwilling to accept such an unreasonable punishment and fought with the captors. However, without weapons, they were soon defeated by Osha's sticks and shields. Their clothes were stripped off and they were pressed to the sand. Thuram himself carried out the flogging. Seeing their clansmen suffering, some clans were tempted to take action, but they stopped in their tracks when faced with the Grey Castle warriors' iron pipe weapons. Everyone had heard of the case of the Oasis watchdogs being defeated in one night. Even the swift cavalrymen were unable to break through the Grey Castle's defensive line. What they relied on was the exquisite gray iron weapons in their hands. For a time, screams rose and fell from the shore. Fortunately, Wuxia did not intend to let the torturers die. Their backs, which were badly bruised and fleshy, were smeared with herbs and bandaged tightly with gauze. The cold months of demons was not the peak period for the plague. As long as they were strong enough, they should have no problem surviving. Carlone and most of his clansmen looked a little unsightly. Only Molly's face was full of joy. After watching the execution with lingering fear, they were guided by the whistle and divided into two groups, heading into the depths of the sand. During this period, Thuram did not say a word, but everyone consciously maintained the order of the group. When they arrived near the Iron Tower, Simbadi saw a disappearing oasis, or rather a pond. It was probably the drinking water place for the vanguard troops mentioned by Thuram. There were no trees around the pond, only a few withered shrubs. The bottom of the pond was very shallow, only about the height of a person. Perhaps decades ago, it was still a vibrant oasis. However, as the water vein of Silver Stream gradually dried up, it would eventually turn into a handful of yellow sand. This pond was barely enough for the hundreds of people who worked here, let alone for the tribe to live and multiply. They could still see the water now, but it was only because there was only a little stream left in the underground sewer. When summer came, the water that seeped out would not be enough for the sun to shine. Even if they did not drink it, it would quickly evaporate into a dry valley. Simbadi had seen many similar oasis ruins. In other words, if the people of Grey Castle could not find a new water source in the next 2 to 3 months, they would have to retreat, let alone build a new town. Thuram did not try to hide it. He walked beside the team and shouted, "See this pond? For the next few days, all the water we'll be drinking will come from here. If you want to pee, get the hell away from me. Do you understand?" "Then what about food?" someone asked. "Someone will bring it over. If you think it's not enough, you can go fishing," Thuram replied. Now that they no longer had to worry about food and drink, the clans felt much more at ease. They spread out in 2s and 3s and set up tents according to the requirements of the OSHA manager. Quickly dismantling and assembling a tent was a survival skill that every Sand Nation had to master. A small sheepskin tent that could withstand the cold could accommodate 3 to 6 people, and the necessary parts were usually carried by one person. There were only 4 women from the Fishbone clan who applied to work here, so they set up the simplest triangular tents. That was, 3 tents were arranged in a triangular formation and fastened with hemp ropes. The doors were open to the outside, which could serve as a warning to each other. In the afternoon, the whistle sounded again. Thuram gathered everyone and led them to a place near the coast. Simbadi was surprised to find that the northerners had searched everywhere. Short wooden poles were everywhere on the flat sandy ground. White ropes were tied to the middle of the poles, which formed a huge rectangular area. Each square was at least 100 paces wide, or even longer, as if marking a territory. The most incredible thing was that these squares seemed to be almost the same size, and each edge was neat and tidy. No one knew how they managed to stay the same within a distance of 100 paces. He roughly counted, and found that there were as many as 50 or 60 squares drawn out by the white ropes. The people of Grey Castle, who were gesticulating with strange tools, were still inserting new wooden poles as if they intended to extend them to the end of their site. "You're finally here." A tall man walked up to Thuram. "I'm Kinkert, a member of the former Mason Guild in King's City. Ah, you probably haven't heard of me. After all, there aren't many people in Grey Castle who know about the Mason Guild. Fortunately, His Majesty is kind enough to take us in. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know where to live." No, we can talk about this later." He coughed twice and patted the man on the shoulder. "Anyway, I'm in charge of the construction project in Endless Cape. You must be the manager appointed by Miss Echo, right?" "Echo? Isn't that the nickname of Lady Drow Silvermoon?" Simbadi exclaimed inwardly. This Grey Castle man, who calls himself Kinkert, has the same status as the chief of the clan? Thuram's smile was a little stiff. Perhaps he was not used to Kinkert's nagging and etiquette. He took a step back, bowed his head and said, "You can call me Thuram. As for these brats, just tell me what you need to do. If anyone dares to slack off, I'll punish him severely. Apparently, he had received instructions from the chief of Wuxia in advance, and was very respectful to King Kurt. However, Simbadi knew that it was the warriors of Grey Castle who stared at them that made Thuram behave this way. Very well. King Kurt opened his arms and said, "Lads, there are no taverns or women here. Ahem, I mean women. So, put all your energy into the construction of Newport Bay. The first task for you is very simple, which is to dig holes. Do you see those white boxes? Just dig out the sand and put it aside. As for how deep each hole should be, make sure it's knee-deep." No one responded to his call, and the crowd fell silent for a moment. "Are you all deaf?" Thuram raised his eyebrows and shouted, "Get to work." Although he sounded irritable, there was a hint of complacency in his eyes. "Wait." King Kurt raised his hand to stop them. "Don't worry. I haven't explained to them why we need to dig these holes." "Sir, you don't have to explain to them." No. I agree with His Majesty's words, which is subjective." "Yes, subjective initiative." King Kurt suddenly clapped his hands. "The general idea is that once people know what they're working for, their work efficiency will be greatly improved. So listen. These holes are related to whether we can settle down here in the future. These holes," he paused for a moment, "are the key to turning seawater into fresh water." Hearing this, the crowd suddenly became restless. "It's very simple. It's no different from boiling water, but only His Majesty could think of this. Let seawater into the holes. Use the heat of the sun to heat it up and turn it into water vapor, and then collect it to get clean drinking water." King Kurt gestured excitedly. "It doesn't matter if you don't understand. Just think of the sea as water mixed with salt, so it's bitter and astringent. As long as the salt is separated, the entire swirling sea can be used by us. Is this possible?" Simbadi was stunned. Not to mention whether the second half of King Kurt's conclusion was correct. How could they collect something as illusory as water vapor? Of course, its production is very limited. A square area can only meet the needs of about 10 people, so we need to build a large number of transformation sheds to supply the hundreds of workers stationed here. King Kurt clenched his fist and said, "You should feel lucky. His Majesty pays special attention to the construction plan of Endless Cape, and this is the second town named by him after Neverwinter. To celebrate the unification of the southernmost region, His Majesty gave it the name Festive Harbor, and you are not only the builders of the Festive Harbor, but also its first residents." Chapter 806. Lightning returned to the camp tent, took off her goggles and gloves, and put her numb hands above the brazier. A burning sensation and a slight tingling sensation came from his fingertips. Winter had passed for nearly half a month, but the snow did not seem to be getting any weaker. Instead, it was getting heavier and heavier. Every time she came back from an expedition, she could feel the top of her head was wet, and it took a while for the skin on her face to recover. When her hands were a little warm, she moved a stool and sat beside the brazier. Then she took off her wet boots and put her feet above the flames. She could clearly see that the front of her cotton socks was steaming, and her cold toes were getting a little warm. As for the smell, the little girl turned her head away in embarrassment. She had been stuck in her boots for so long that there would be some smell of sweat. Now she finally understood why her father would emphasize that a great explorer should have a great team behind him to support him. If the First Army had not prepared a brazier or even hot water in advance, she would not have been able to devote herself to the exploration. The thought of returning to the camp with a cold body and having to make a fire to boil water was a devastating blow to her enthusiasm for exploration. But probably only His Majesty's team can provide hot water in the wild all day long. Lightning thought. In the stories of his father's adventures, it was undoubtedly very difficult to have a hot bath in the middle of winter. Damp firewood, rotten leaves covered with snow, and the extra physical effort needed to collect them were all obstacles to bathing. Therefore, most of the time, the members of the adventurer team would only have a chance to thoroughly wash their bodies after the end of the expedition. But the machines built by His Majesty completely changed everything. The camp was built not far from the river bank, and the boilers on the 3 cement boats had never been extinguished, providing the whole camp with a steady stream of hot water. When they wanted to use hot water, they just needed to carry buckets to get it. In addition, the same was true for food. A uniquely shaped concrete boat took care of everyone's rations. Its upper level was like a mobile kitchen. Using the steam from the boiler, it could cook a large amount of oatmeal every day. Together with cooked jerky and salted fish, it was much more delicious than the hard dry rations. According to her father's standards, this was probably the best logistics team in the world. After warming up her hands and feet, Lightning took out her notebook and began to record the contents of today's adventure. On the 16th of spring, the excavation continued. The thick mountain hindered the abilities of Sylvie and Maggie, especially Sylvie. Traversing through the rock layer would consume a lot of magic power. To ensure safety, each search must reserve enough magic power for the return trip, so there was no way to dive too deep. Limited by the distance, Sylvie could only roughly choose a few directions, and let Miss Fran try to dig. By the way, Miss Fran, though frightening in appearance, is surprisingly amiable, and when she eats she is scarier than Maggie. I do hope that one day she will regain her original appearance. From the moment they arrived at the foot of the snowy mountain, it was already the 13th day of their exploration. The only thing that could be confirmed was that there was indeed a huge hole in the mountain, and it seemed to be formed by many caves. However, it was not easy to smoothly find the main cave that might contain the ruins, not to mention digging a spacious passage for the first army to enter. In this regard, she and Maggie could not help much. They could only be responsible for guarding the periphery, or entering those strange caves to explore the deep trenches and mountain faults that the magic arc could not easily cross. Compared to exploring the mysteries of the ruins, finding the right path to the destination was always the most time-consuming, and also the most energy-consuming work. It was just like what her father always said, an explorer is always on the road. The little girl blew 2 hot breaths into her palms, and then continued to write. Finally, the most outstanding explorer of Grey Castle, Lightning's new discovery. Under the ice layer at the peak of the Great Snowy Mountain, there is a long black shadow moving. It looks like a huge fish. I don't know how long it has lived to grow so big, but I think it must taste very good. Unfortunately, Anna did not come, so we have no way to cut the ice layer to fish it out. Maggie's claws can only leave a few scratches on the ice, and using explosives on the mountaintop is also a big taboo. Perhaps we can only wait until the snow melts in summer to think of a way. At this point, Lightning could not help but lick her lips. In order to explore the snow mountain, she had not eaten charcoal grilled fish for a long time. Perhaps when Maggie came back, the two of them could go to the concealing forest to get some food before the night fell. As long as I prepared a portion for Sister Vendi, she should not blame me, right? There is another less important discovery. There is a phenomenon of demonic beasts gathering to the east of the concealing forest, but His Majesty's city wall will definitely be able to stop them. After recording these, Lightning stuffed the sheepskin book into a waterproof leather bag, wrapped it, and put it back into her backpack. It was a necessary habit for an explorer to record what she saw and heard every day. Just like the captain's log, it was not only a proof of the explorer's personal honor, but also a beacon to guide the future explorers. When the owner accidentally met with an accident, other explorers could also analyze the reason based on the log, so as to avoid walking the same path. At this moment, there was a rush of footsteps outside the door. It was Vendi who opened the tent curtain. Agatha and the others are back. Her voice was a little anxious. There was an accident in the cave. Fran is missing. What? Lightning stood up in surprise. Missing? When the witches who stayed in the camp arrived at the end of the tunnel left by the devouring worm, the soldiers of the First Army had already set up a fire and a sentry post. Agatha was arguing with the tequila witches about something. Lightning looked out and suddenly gasped. In front of her was a bottomless pit. She could not see the top or the bottom. She could only hear the continuous sound of water coming from above. The edge of the tunnel had collapsed. She took out the stone of lighting and bent down. There was a lot of slippery mucus left in the crack. Miss Fran fell from here? At present it seems so. Sylvie found the right direction. Unfortunately, Fran was unlucky. Edith answered her. She opened the way to the big pit, but because of the sudden cliff, she fell to the bottom of the cave. Seems. Lightning noticed the wording of the other side. At that time, Sylvie and Maggie were searching on the other side, a place where they could see Fran. According to Sylvie, Fran's magic reaction suddenly disappeared from her sight. Edith shrugged. I don't know how your ability works, but Miss Sylvie's eye of magic should be able to see the scene in a very far place, right? But when they arrived here, they couldn't see anything at the bottom of the cave. Couldn't see. The little girl was stunned. Chapter 807. Lightning could not help but fall into silence. She knew that Edith was right. If the pit was really that deep, it was easy to imagine what would happen if they fell into it. If the answer was the latter, and the magic power was interfered with, the situation would be even more complicated. It would be fine if there was a large god stone of retaliation at the bottom of the pit, but if it was a trap set by the enemy, it would be too dangerous for the rescuers. Those strange sickle beasts and the worm carrier that had swallowed the Devil's Stone Tower could all be hiding in the Great Snow Mountain. Without Nightingale and Sylvie's warning and the cover of the First Army, even the God's Punishment witches might not be able to bring Fran back successfully. The little girl took a deep breath. However, exploration itself was full of danger. A qualified explorer should not leave his companions in the lurch. Let me go down and have a look. She walked up to the two parties and said, no matter what we do next, we have to find out the situation at the bottom of the cave. Your ability is. The blond man turned his head and asked. Lightning remembered that the man's name was Elena. Although he had a male body, his soul was that of an ancient tequila witch. Flying. She knocked on the goggles on top of her head and said, in this case, I'll have an advantage over you. It's not a matter of convenience. Agatha frowned and said, if you can't use your ability at the bottom of the cave, how will you come back? His Majesty said that this search must not be carried out alone. Both the Witch Union and Tequila must cooperate with the First Army and move forward steadily. Just hang a rope around my waist, Lightning said. If it really is a god's stone of retaliation that creates an anti-magic area, then I won't have any major problems. As long as you find the rope hanging on the wall, you can directly pull me up. An explorer not abandoning a companion did not mean that she would act recklessly. When she was a child, she had heard her father talk about many thrilling emergencies. As long as she handled it properly, most accidents could be avoided. Even without magic power, she was still the most outstanding explorer. Let me go with you, Nightingale interrupted. There's no up or down in the misty world. I can easily walk on the cliff. Even if an enemy appears, I can cover her as soon as possible. How is this any different from acting alone? Vendi shook her head. If it's a trap, you two won't be able to deal with it. Don't forget that there are powerful enemies like senior demons in this world. We won't leave Fran behind. If you don't want to go, we'll go by ourselves. Elena said in a low voice. Have you forgotten the importance of obeying orders after 400 years? Agatha's voice also became serious. In the name of the senior tequila witches, I ask you not to act without permission. Hearing this, all the God's Punishment witches fell silent. Elena bit her lip, took 2 steps back, and saluted with her hand on her chest. You don't have to quarrel over this, Edith suddenly said. According to His Majesty's order, the exploration must be carried out by the 3 parties, so we only need to send the First Army down, right? Have you found the way down? Brian, the leader of the First Army, was stunned. I didn't find the way, but I found this. She pointed to a cliff near the entrance of the cave. Under the light of the torch, there were twinkling spots on the cliff, which were the sparkling light refracted by the running water. The cement ship used to cook porridge has a set of lifting equipment. I often see them directly hoist food from other supply ships instead of carrying it by hand. Ah, you mean that set of basket system? Brian nodded and said, it can indeed carry a lot of goods at one time, but it needs to be driven by a steam engine. So, as long as we move the machine on the ship here, we can transport 2 machine gun squads at the same time and enter the deep pit with the witches, Edith said word by word. The length of the rope can be extended through the connection, and the heavy machine shouldn't be a problem for the god's punishment witches. There is water here, so it can be guaranteed to work, and His Majesty's request for a retreat passage can also be satisfied. The only problem is how to dismantle it. Someone in the First Army should be able to do this, right? Brian hesitated and said, "It's not a problem to dismantle it, but if we want to put it back. That's only a ship and a steam engine." Edith raised her eyebrows and said, "It's only 500 or 600 golden dragon coins in total. What do you think His Majesty will choose? 500 or 600? Lightning could not help but twitch the corner of her mouth. "That's not a small number, is it?" Brian did not think for too long and quickly nodded. "I see. You'll get a steam engine soon." An hour later, a roaring machine appeared beside the pit. After the cantilevers of the basket system were moved here, they found it difficult to fix them in the rock, so they simply abandoned this part of the equipment and only used the capstan as a tool. The flywheel of the steam engine drove the heavy capstan to rotate back and forth, sending the hemp rope straight into the big pit. In order to prevent the hemp rope from being worn down by the rock wall, Agatha summoned solid ice to wrap around the entrance of the pit, so that the rope could move up and down smoothly. The end of the hemp rope was connected to a huge iron basket, which was large enough to carry 6 to 8 people and 2 Mark I-type heavy machine guns. Even if the witches lost their fighting ability, the machine gun team could still provide powerful cover fire. The first batch of people to take the basket were Agatha, Elena, and 6 soldiers of the First Army, accompanied by Lightning and Nightingale. After the adjustment of the lifting device, they slowly sank into the deep pit, and the light above their heads became increasingly dim. Lightning tied the rope and flew to the bottom of the center of the cave, to lead the way for the people behind her. She was a little uncomfortable without Maggie by her side, but someone had to stay outside the snow mountain. Compared with monitoring the movements of the demonic beasts, she was more interested in solving the mystery of the underground ruins. Every time they descended more than 10 meters, she would look behind her. The fire at the sentry post was almost covered by the darkness, and the only light was from the 2 stones of lighting in the basket. The soft and stable light reflected a pale golden ribbon, which was the layer of ice left by Agatha on the rock wall. The solid ice filled the rugged rocks, turning it into a flat mirror, which was the only way to ensure the smooth fall of the group. After flying for about 100 meters, Lightning's heart sank little by little. The survival rate of ordinary people falling from this height was very low, and the only thing she could hope for was that the devouring worm carrier was particularly tenacious. At this moment, she noticed a strange reflection under her feet. The light was very dim, as if the darkness had opened its eyes, like a flickering slit. Lightning used the stones of lighting to send 2 signals upward, held her breath, and accelerated the fall. Then she stepped on a hard and smooth rock. She bent down and gently touched the ground. The surface of the dark rock was smooth like a crystal, and the dark reflection was mixed with a touch of red. She had seen this thing before. Chapter 808. It seems that the worm really treats this place as its nest. After the basket landed, Agatha looked around with the stone of lighting in her hand. She frowned and asked, "Did you find Fran?" "Miss Fran isn't here." Lightning had already checked the surroundings. "The Blackstone Tower seems to be stuck in the middle of the cave. There's a gap on both sides. Could she have fallen on the tower and rolled down from the side?" The 2 ends of the diamond-shaped tower were embedded in the rock wall, like a bridge in a deep pit. No one knew how the tower did it. As for the tentacle demon and the 100-eyed demon hiding at the bottom of the tower, they were nowhere to be seen. "This thing doesn't affect my ability to use," Nightingale said as she emerged from the mist. "But you can't pass through it like you can through a wall, right?" Agatha squatted down and summoned a piece of ice to stab at the Blackstone Tower. The ice cone shattered, but the surface of the tower remained intact. Rumor has it that it was made of God's Stone of Retaliation. Although it doesn't affect the magic power in a wide range like the prism of the God's Stone, it can still isolate magic power. "Not make but grow," Elena corrected in a low voice. "The decaying magic can change the effect of the God's Stone mineral vein and promote it to grow into a steel." However, only the one born under the bloody moon has the ability to produce red mist. The others just keep the red mist from dissipating too quickly. This was a top secret in the Union era. But after the fall of Tequila, Lady Eleanor told us all about it. Why didn't you tell us earlier? Nightingale said unhappily. You didn't tell me that there would be a demon spire here, Elena retorted. There are so many things that can affect magic power. How could I have guessed that it would be this thing? We have to keep going down. Lightning flew between the two of them, interrupting their confrontation. There is still some distance to the bottom of the cave. I just tried to fly down a little bit, and I can hear the faint sound of running water. There may be an underground river below. If Miss Fran really fell from either side of the stone tower, she may still be able to survive. Really? Elena sounded excited. Is it possible that Sylvie didn't find Fran because of the underground river? Very likely. Agatha nodded. Most of the Eye of Magic site is blocked by this stone tower. That's why she said she couldn't see the ground. If Fran was washed away by the water, she wouldn't be able to see the light of magic. She turned to Lightning and said, Fly up and tell Vendi about our situation. Ask her to ask Maggie to send some God's punishment witches down. And ask the soldiers of the First Army to set up a sentry post here. Then we'll continue our exploration. Okay, leave it to me. The little girl nodded. With the help of the magic arc, they quickly gathered enough manpower. During this time, Lightning completed her inspection of the space under the Blackrock Pagoda. Just as she had expected, the vertical wall did not last long before it gradually tilted and the air became more and more humid. After descending 30 to 40 meters, a wide underground river appeared in front of her. The snow water that flowed along the walls of the cave converged into a rapid stream of water, pouring down from the entrance of the cave, forming a waterfall. When the little girl approached it, she could feel the cold air blowing on her face. Due to the abundant water, the bottom of the deep pit was covered with all kinds of moss and mushrooms. Some of the plants even emitted a cold blue light, illuminating the surrounding ground. Even without the use of the stone of lighting, they could vaguely see the outline of the karst cave. Together with the flying fireflies, the whole underground world was like another world. When the witches and the tequila survivors boarded the magic ark and descended to the bottom of the cave, they were all attracted by the scene in front of them. It would be great if these glowing fruits could be planted in Neverwinter. Nightingale sighed. Then everyone would be able to see the road clearly at night. Shall we take some back and plant them? Lightning excitedly rubbed her hands together. Discovering and cultivating new species was also one of the things that explorers often did. For example, sugar cane and corn were harvested from other small islands in the fjords by the explorers. Step by step, they cultivated them into what they were today. She wondered if these giant mushrooms and the glowing cattail fruits would be as sweet as the bird beak mushrooms. Let's finish our business first. Agatha counted the number of people and said, Maggie, you stay here and help the First Army set up a sentry here. We'll continue to walk along the underground river. If we don't find Fran after 2 kilometers, we'll temporarily set up camp. No one objected. Lightning, Nightingale, and Agatha all had the ability to escape and protect themselves. The 10 Gods Punishment Witches led by Elena were all extraordinary, and their fighting strength was equivalent to that of an extraordinary. Although there were not many of them, they could be regarded as the most elite group in the United Front. After entering the underground river cave, the sound of the water became extremely loud, as if it was roaring right next to her ears. Lightning had to get closer to hear what they were talking about. Can the devouring worm swim in the water? Agatha asked. No one has tried that. Elena shook her head. But the worm's body is extremely large. I think even if it is pushed forward by the water, it shouldn't be too far from the deep pit. Can you tell where the river comes from and which direction it goes? Another God's Punishment Witch asked. The little girl remembered that her name was Zoe. If I remember correctly, it's facing the direction where we entered the snow mountain. Nightingale answered her. That is to say, it should come from the underground water vein of the western region and lead to the hilly area in the south. Lightning could not help feeling a little strange. It was not surprising that the underground water resources in His Majesty's territory were abundant, but to the south? There wasn't a proper river there, so where did all the water go in the end? Suddenly, she saw something on the stone wall not far away tremble. Wait, there seems to be something in front of us. Following her warning, everyone stopped in their tracks and pulled out their weapons. There's no magic reaction. Nightingale quickly confirmed this. But there is indeed something hiding there. She paused and seemed to take 2 steps closer. It looks like a semicircular egg? What? Agatha was slightly stunned. Since it doesn't have magic power, it can't be a threat to us. Elena waved to the god's punishment witches beside her. Follow me. Nothing unexpected happened during the encirclement. When Lightning looked closely at the trembling object, she could not help but frown. She saw a mass of gray skin stuck to the cave wall. At first glance, it looked no different from the surrounding rocks. However, when she raised the stone of lighting close to the skin, she could see that it was covered with many openings, which matched the undulation of the skin as if it was breathing. What the hell? What's this? Elena spat. It's disgusting. If it's really an egg, then how big was the mother that laid it? Lightning asked as she measured the surface area of the skin, and found that it was about 3 meters long and wide. The swollen part in the center could almost fit an adult cow. No, this shape. Zoe suddenly gasped. She pulled out her long sword, stabbed it into the skin, and then flicked it upward. A sharp cry was heard, and a large amount of mucus sprayed out from the broken egg. Then a black shadow slid out of the swollen part, and fell to the ground softly. Chapter 809. Almost at the same time, the whole skin also curled up. A reptile crawled out of the stone wall, and quickly climbed up to the top of the cave, dragging its mucus-dripping skin bag. But Nightingale moved faster than it. She suddenly appeared from the mist and hung upside down on the ceiling of the cave, as if she was walking on flat ground. She stood in front of the reptile. Before her body fell, a silver dagger had already pierced the reptile's head and pinned it to the stone wall. After struggling for a while, the reptile's 6 slender legs all drooped down, and it was no longer breathing. At this time, Lightning noticed that the so-called egg was just the reptile's torso. It was just that its head and legs were buried in the stone before, so it was covered by its huge abdomen. The size of the insect was out of proportion. The front half of its body was like an enlarged ant, no more than half a meter long. However, the back half, which was the skin that wrapped around the mad demon, was so big that it could fit 3 large wine barrels. Even though half of the mucus had spilled out and the entire stomach was deflated, the surface area was still shockingly large. The demon was born from this thing's stomach? The little girl asked in surprise. I've never heard of such a thing. Agatha squatted down and carefully looked at the demon with the light from the magic stone. This mad demon is already a fully mature individual. Look at its arm. Not only are there scars from the magic stone, but its arm is also much thicker than the other one, which means it has used magic power to throw spears more than once. But where's the magic stone? I don't know. Maybe someone took it away. So it was this reptile? Elena said impatiently. It swallowed the demon and hung it on the wall to digest the food. Then it happened to meet us. The magic stone was lost in the battle, or it was directly digested. Does this make any sense? Don't worry about this disgusting reptile. Finding Fran is the most important thing. Swallowed? Lightning thought to itself. Its mouth could barely swallow an adult human, not to mention a mad demon that was nearly 3 meters tall and had a burly physique. That's strange. Nightingale's voice suddenly came from the void. It's already dead. Why is its magic power only dissipating now? What? Agatha was stunned. You mean this demon? That's right. Its magic power is very thin, like mist. I only noticed it when it rolled out of the worm's stomach. But it was indeed lifeless at that time. Judging from the degree of decay of its skin, it was at least 1 or 2 days old. Nightingale was puzzled. Isn't it impossible for magic to gather on dead things? If you're not mistaken, it's indeed very strange. Zoe nodded and stabbed the long sword in her hand into the stone wall. Maybe we should take these 2 corpses back and study them. Let's leave a mark first and come back to deal with them after setting up camp. However, the group did not go far before they found several eggworms one after another. They were not all buried in the cave walls. Some were directly standing on the riverbank or in the mushroom bushes. This time, they were experienced. Every attack was aimed at the vital parts, and the heads of the worms buried in the soil were cut off one by one. When they cut open the worms' stomachs, they found fearsome demons and human corpses in addition to mad demons. This made the witches' faces very pale. There were no human settlements outside the border area. How did they catch these prey? Or had the enemy secretly extended its tentacles into the territory of Neverwinter? At this moment, Nightingale suddenly warned. There's magic reaction in front. Wait, no. Is that Fran? Where? Elena did not rush over immediately. Instead, she spread out with the other gods' punishment witches, holding their swords and guarding the surroundings. Lightning knew that in the misty world, there were only 2 colors, black and white. Most objects were made of intuitive and distorted outlines, but only magic power had bright colors. Therefore, the gloomy underground did not affect Nightingale at all. 200 meters ahead on the left, about 400 steps, she seems to be entangled by something. Her voice was a little farther away, and became blurred by the noise of the water. I can't see anything around. I'll go first. Wait. Not long after, 2 gunshots were heard. Bang bang. The roar of the flintlocks sounded particularly loud in the cave. The gods' punishment witches looked at each other, and kept advancing in formation. Lightning was 1 step faster. She flew over the crowd and headed straight for the source of the gunshots while holding the revolver in her hand. Fortunately, what she was worried about did not happen. Nightingale quickly raised the stone of lighting to guide them. At the latter's feet lay 2 monsters with scythe-like front claws. There was a big hole in their heads and blue blood was dripping on the ground. Are these the demonic beasts that can hide themselves? Lightning asked while floating in the air. Yes, but no matter how good their skills are, they can't escape my eyes. Nightingale proudly put the revolver into her belt and patted Fran, who was firmly trapped beside her. Am I right? Fran wriggled a few times and made a few stuttering sounds. It seemed that her mouth was sealed. At this moment, the little girl noticed that both sides of the worm carrier were wrapped with a white gelatinous substance, which firmly fixed it in place. Even its giant mouth was sealed. Apart from that, her strong body was covered with scars. Apparently, she had fallen hard into the deep pit. What surprised her was that there was more than 1 giant worm like Fran. Right beside her, there were 2 other devouring worms lying quietly as if they were asleep. This is... An idea suddenly occurred to Lightning. She jumped down and pushed away the moss on the ground. A mottled stone slab suddenly appeared in front of her. Oh. Nightingale whistled. Good, it seems that we've found the legendary Snow Mountain ruins, she said excitedly. What the hell happened? The rest of the gods' punishment witches had just arrived. In order not to stray too far from each other, the gods' punishment witches maintained the same speed. Elena was always in the front, which made Lightning's opinion of her change a little. We've found Fran and 2 monsters that seem to want to eat her, Nightingale explained briefly. She's fine. She's just tied up and can't move. This is already part of the underground ruins. The enemy is probably nearby. We should leave here as soon as possible after rescuing her. We'll summon the first army and set up a sentry post first. Elena nodded and pulled out the heavy sword on her back. She quickly cut open the extremely elastic gelatinous substance. When Fran's big mouth was freed, everyone heard her growl. Don't look up. However, when Lightning heard this, she subconsciously raised her head. It was pitch black above her head. At first glance, there was nothing. The pit here expanded upward again, forming a huge space like the dome of a hall. The stone of lighting could only illuminate the ground within an inch of the surrounding area. She could not see anything above her head at all. But the next moment, she felt goosebumps all over her body. A scarlet eye appeared in the darkness, then a second, a third. Chapter 8:10. Did you hear a sound just now? Edith looked at Brian, who was commanding the soldiers to set up a defensive line at the bottom of the cave. A sound. Brian stopped what he was doing and looked around with a puzzled expression. No, Miss Edith, I didn't hear anything except the sound of water. Really? She frowned. Did I hear it wrong? What kind of sound was it? It sounded like a horn, very muddy. Very similar to the sound of water. Edith paused. It seemed to be coming from the south. That was the direction the witches had explored. The turbulent underground river flowed from the north to the south and disappeared into the dark cave. Although there were some strange luminous plants growing on both sides, they could not illuminate too far. The whole waterway was like an entrance to the abyss, engulfing everything she saw. Well, I think it may be because we are deep in the snow mountains and can't see the sky, or even the lack of firelight, so it's an illusion. Brian smiled considerately. Soldiers who have been to the battlefield are fine, so it's not surprising that you feel nervous. If you feel uneasy, you can go back to the entrance with Miss Maggie later. Familiar expression and familiar words. Edith was not surprised by the words of the firearm battalion commander. Although she was wearing light leather armor and a helmet and had a saber hanging on her waist, most people still regarded her as a bystander sent by City Hall, or a pearl-like woman, just like her title, beautiful and fragile. Because of this, it was very common to see concern and flattery along the way. However, they did not understand that the pearls produced by the northern giant clams were all soaked in blood. The blood of fish, the blood of aquatic beasts, and even the blood of fishermen. That was why they could grow so huge and produce round pearls the size of a fist. Probably only Roland Wimbledon had ignored her appearance from the beginning, and even regarded her as an opponent. Thank you, but I'd better stay here. If I run back alone, won't I be a disgrace to His Majesty's City Hall? However, Edith didn't reveal what she was thinking. She smiled and declined Brian's suggestion. Her smile stunned Brian a little, and after a while, he looked away in embarrassment. I don't think His Majesty and Lord Barev will mind. Brian coughed twice. But I don't understand. Why did you follow the First Army to such a dangerous place? That's the only way you'll trust me, Eddie said bluntly. That? You should have heard about the Battle of Divine Will, she said frankly. When a fateful battle comes, His Majesty naturally can't take care of all aspects of the war. He needs many officials to help him command the army. And the army also needs people from City Hall to provide logistics and security. And at that time, will you trust an official who has fought alongside you? Or someone who sits in an office and deals with documents all day? A look of surprise appeared on Brian's face. He stared blankly for a moment before saying, You really dare to say such things? Edith, of course, knew what he was referring to. Even a former patrol captain born and raised in this village could understand the meaning of his words. To put it nicely, it was called helping to command, but to put it bluntly, it was called interfering power. If it were any other lord, this would absolutely be intolerable, especially for the group of knight subordinates, who must be personally controlled by him. However, now that the number of people in the First Army had exceeded 5,000, the way the Knight Regiment did was obviously too backward. In fact, the advisor department established by His Majesty was such an organization between the army and City Hall. The ultimate power still belonged to him, and the commanding power below him would only be further expanded. It was because Edith understood Roland Wimbledon's thoughts that she dared to say these words. She didn't intend to join the advisor department, but just wanted to expand her influence as much as possible. If it were any other king, of course I wouldn't dare, but His Majesty is different. She smiled. You know, I was the one who proposed that City Hall officials have to go to the front line to be eligible for promotion. Since I said so in front of everyone, I have to set an example. His Majesty agreed? No, I can only say that he didn't object. Doesn't that mean he agreed? Brian asked confusedly. Politics can't be understood in this way. Edith spread out her hands. Even a verbal promise doesn't necessarily count before it becomes a law, let alone silence. I see. The firearm battalion commander could not help but sigh. Politics is really complicated. You're right. In addition, the purpose of this trip was to get closer to the witches, understand their abilities and characters, and live together with them. There was no doubt that His Majesty had invested a lot of energy in the witches, and the construction of Neverwinter was also inseparable from the witches. If Barav wanted to reach the peak of power, he naturally needed to win their support. So far, the plan was going very smoothly. Probably because she was also a woman, she would not be rejected when she came in contact with the witches, which became an obstacle for Barav. The next batch of witches should be the gods' punishment witches, right? Edith changed the topic. Yes, probably. Miss Maggie can only transport 5 or 6 people at a time, so it'll take at least a dozen trips to set up the outpost. Brian also cooperated and replied, "By the way, where do you think the second machine gun should be placed?" "A relatively high place." "Well, I remember there's a piece of rock behind that seems good." Just as she turned to look at the cave behind her, a luminous plant seemed to distort, as if something had broken the stability of the air, and the scene became blurred. "What's that?" Before she had time to warn the soldiers of the First Army, the air violently distorted again, and this time the ripple appeared behind the machine gun squad. With a soft swish, a soldier's head rolled down from his neck, his smile still frozen on his face. "Enemy attack!" Edith shouted. "The enemy can't be seen." Almost as soon as her voice died away, 2 more soldiers were pierced in the chest. The moment the blood splashed, the ripple was also dyed red. "There's more than one enemy." Her mind raced, and she threw a dagger with one hand straight at the place where the first soldier fell. At the same time, she pulled out her sword and followed. When the dagger was knocked away by the invisible thing, her long sword stabbed into the root of the ripple from another angle. Edith knew that if they kept retreating, they would be surrounded. There was only one campfire here, and it was the only way to discover the enemy's movement. Without the light of the fire, they had no way to resist this almost invisible monster, so they absolutely could not escape easily. While they could roughly determine the enemy's position, attacking was the only chance to win. Edith felt a soft touch from the tip of the long sword, as if it had pierced into the flesh, which made her feel happy. She was right. Whether it was a human or a beast, the connection between the weapon and the body was definitely a weakness, such as the hand holding the sword and the end of the claws. Once injured, they would lose the ability to attack for a short time. Just as Edith was about to retreat, a chilly wind swept toward her from the other side. So fast that she even felt a chill on her face. Shit, this guy actually has 2 weapons? Her many years of fighting experience made her subconsciously loosen her right hand that was holding the sword. At the same time, she rolled on the ground. Something seemed to brush past her from the back of her head. Her long hair suddenly scattered, like withered petals blooming, scattering everywhere. She did not have time to get up and directly shouted at Brian. "Quick, shoot me!" For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 811. The soldiers finally realized what was going on. Since it was too late to turn the other machine gun, they took out the revolver rifles on their backs and opened fire. The long sword stuck in the monster's body became the best landmark. Within a distance of 10 steps, it was almost impossible for the revolver rifle to miss the target. All the soldiers, including Brian, fired all the bullets in one breath. The dense barrage swept over Edith's head. She could even hear the sound of the bullets cutting through the air. He turned around and saw that the distorted air had solidified. A monster had appeared out of thin air. It was almost 6 feet tall when it stood up, half a head taller than an adult. In addition to a pair of forelimbs as sharp as sickles, it also had 7 or 8 pairs of legs on its abdomen. It was covered in a grayish-brown carapace, which made it look creepy. Fortunately, the carapace could not withstand the close-range gunfire. A fist-sized wound appeared on its slender, locust-like head. It twitched twice and fell to the ground, covered in blood. "Get out of the way!" Edith suddenly heard a roar behind her. A heavy sword answered the call. The force of the swing was so great that it produced a deep buzzing sound. The body of the sword smashed directly in front of the first machine gun squad, sending the other 2 monsters flying. The invisible ripples also dissipated. Then several gods' punishment witches passed by her side, raised their swords and slashed horizontally, cutting the monster in half before it could get up. Realizing that the reinforcements had arrived, Edith was a little relieved. There were not many enemies. Without the advantage of stealth, they were soon cut into pieces by the extraordinary warriors who rushed up. She also noticed that when the monsters approached the gods' punishment witches, they would show a strange form. For example, half of them were hiding in the void, but the other half were forced to show their original forms, as if the ability of stealth had failed. "Are you all right?" Maggie helped Edith up. "We saw these enemies in the rock wall. Unfortunately, we were one step too late." "Using the colorful magic stones?" "That's right." Another tall man walked up to her and said, "Leave this to us. Mortal weapons are not good at dealing with this kind of situation. Go and inform the people above, and bring some god's punishment witches down." Edith remembered that her name was Betty. "Can you destroy their camouflage?" A skill similar to the god's stone of retaliation. The man shrugged. "At present, it can only disable the enemy's stealth for a short time. But they also have the god's stone of retaliation. Why can't we see the enemy?" Brian looked at the 3 soldiers' bodies on the ground and asked, gnashing his teeth. "That's not surprising," Betty replied calmly. "Light, distance, and concentration will all affect the observation results. Generally, the range of the effect of a god's stone is only 1 or 2 steps. The enemy can be exposed for only the blink of an eye. In such a dim environment, it is normal that we can't see it." Edith couldn't help but sigh. Indeed, most of the time when she noticed the sickle monster showing half of its body was when the 2 sides were fighting. Coupled with the length of the enemy's forelimbs and the advantage of sneak attacks, it was basically too late for ordinary people to realize that something was wrong. To God to say, the god had the god, and the first. Damn it. Brian waved his fist fiercely. "I should have sent down the barbed wire first. Go back. I have a feeling that something might have happened in the cave." Betty urged again. That strange cry just now seemed to have startled the entire snow mountain. "You heard it too?" Edith asked in surprise. "We've lost most of our sense of touch, so our vision and hearing have become extremely sharp." The man looked at her and said, "I didn't expect that mortals could also do this." Sure enough, it wasn't an illusion. Edith nodded. She took off the god's stone of retaliation and threw it beside the machine gun. She pulled Brian and the others to surround Maggie. They sank into the ground with the magic arc and climbed up along the stone wall. Although the commander of the firearm battalion was somewhat reluctant to let the tequila witches fight in the front line, he finally followed the overall situation. After all, once the gods' punishment witches fought with the enemy, they could not open fire on their allies at will. Apparently, the people stationed in the Blackstone Tower did not know about the battle at the bottom of the cave. They were still using ropes to lower tents, gods' punishment witches, guns, ammunition, and other war supplies. After Brian stopped them, he did not transfer to the steam elevator to return to the entrance of the cave. Instead, he asked Maggie to continue moving forward. Just as they were about to reach the worm tunnel, dense gunshots suddenly rang out above their heads. The intensity of the gunshots was like a storm. This meant that the First Army in the sentry post had gone all out and had directly entered the state of full firepower. The faces of the group changed involuntarily. The witches' cheeks even reddened, so they ascended a little faster. After the magic arc rushed out of the ground, Edith could not help but stare at it with wide eyes. She saw broken limbs and internal organs continuously falling from the top of the cave, as if it was raining corpses. 3 machine gun squads lined up and under the command of Sylvie, shot at the pitch-black top of the cave, while the revolver and precision shooting squads aimed at the blind spots above their heads. They did not need to aim at the enemy, but only needed to straighten the barrel and fire along the wall. "What's the enemy?" Brian asked, grabbing a soldier. "It's demonic beasts, my lord," the soldier reported while hurriedly reloading the ammunition. "A group of demonic beasts is rushing down from the top of the snow mountain." "What the hell? Why would they suddenly come to join in the fun at this time?" A thought suddenly flashed across Edith's mind. Was the dull buzzing used to summon their kind? She had read in the book written by His Majesty that there existed a kind of strange sound in this world that was difficult for human ears to hear, but extremely clear for some creatures. Some species could even produce this kind of sound to communicate with their own kind. Could it be that they were now facing such a situation? However, there was more surprising news. While Brian was observing the situation of the battle, another soldier ran into the cave. "Sir, Miss Maggie found signs of abnormal activity of the demonic beasts in the east of the misty forest. They seem to be approaching the direction of the snow mountain, instead of attacking Neverwinter as we expected." "What? This?" The Flintlock Battalion commander was stunned for a moment. "My lord?" The soldier asked anxiously. "What should we do? How could this be? How could this be?" Brian's face was livid as he repeatedly muttered the same words. His forehead was already covered in sweat. This guy is still too inexperienced. Edith frowned. As a commander, she could never show her confusion and helplessness, especially in front of her subordinates. She coughed twice and said, "It's not complicated. First of all, we have to gather the first army stationed outside the snow mountain and concentrate on defending the entrance of the cave. In this way, we can greatly reduce the length of the battle line and only need a few machine guns to stop the attack of demonic beasts." Brian looked at her and it took him a long time to come to his senses. You're right. Secondly, let Miss Maggie immediately contact His Majesty and ask him to send reinforcements just in case. After all, we need ammunition and food supplies from the Redwater River. Once we abandon the camp and defend the passage, we won't be able to fight for a long time. Edith continued quickly and calmly. In addition, demonic beasts can't swim, so don't abandon the cement boats outside. Leave a dozen people to control the demonic beasts and guide the follow-up troops. Miss Sylvie will be responsible for guiding the fire and blocking the demonic beasts at the top of the cave, so it won't be a big problem. As for the distributed godstones, you don't have to wear them for the time being. Bury them around the sentry post to prevent sneak attacks. Finally, don't forget to send tequila witches to the bottom of the cave. Betty is still waiting for our reinforcements. Only when they have enough people can we set off to the south end of the river to find Miss Agatha and the others." Her voice was calm and steady, which gradually calmed the people around her. "This step should be done as soon as possible. If I'm not mistaken, the place where the strange sound came from is the key to solving the problem." Chapter 8:12. This feels so terrible. Crawling out of the worm carrier's stomach along the narrow esophagus, Agatha covered her mouth and retched a few times. "I feel like I was put in a bag full of mucus and slammed against the wall dozens of times." "That's a good description." Nightingale calmly got out of the mist, looked at the wet witches and shrugged. "If Fran hadn't smashed the entrance, we'd all be dead by now." Due to the ability to move freely in the mist form, she did not need to crawl into the worm's stomach like the others, so naturally she was not affected by the impact, the stench, and the sticky mucus. "Sorry, did I use too much force?" Fran asked cautiously. The strong smell made Agatha retch again. "I don't think. It's bad." Lightning wiped the liquid on her hair and sniffed it. Being swallowed by a giant reptile and then crawling out in one piece is an unprecedented experience. I don't think any explorer has ever tried something like this. "Don't be so greedy." Elena rolled her eyes. Compared to feeling nothing, the stench and the sticky feeling are enviable. The god's punishment witches unanimously agreed with Elena's words. "All right. Stop talking." Agatha coughed twice and interrupted them in a hoarse voice. "The next question is, what should we do?" The witches still had some lingering fear when they recalled what had happened a quarter of an hour ago. Although Fran had warned them immediately, their bodies were always faster than their minds when it came to controlling their eyes, especially when they heard the strange buzzing sound. More than one of them could not help but raise their head. No one saw the real body of the monster. The only thing they could see were the tens of thousands of scarlet eyes. Thinking of the black stone tower that had been swallowed by the worm, the densely packed eyes should belong to the vigilant eye demons that occupied the top of the tower. But different from the eye demons, the area covered by the eyes was much wider, as if a body full of strange eyes had been flattened. After the buzzing sound, numerous hybrid demonic beasts emerged from the depths of the ruins and swarmed toward them. According to Nightingale, the cave suddenly lit up with countless magical lights. They seemed to appear out of thin air. They came from the walls, the flowing water, the dark corners of the dome, the bodies of the monsters. They were everywhere. The surging spiritual light converged into streams, and the noisy and ear-piercing roars suppressed the rumbling sound of water splashing. The entire snow mountain seemed to have been awakened from a dream, and it launched an attack on the intruder without permission. At this critical moment, Fran made a crucial decision. She swallowed everyone except Nightingale into her stomach, then turned around and drilled into the cave wall. When her whole body was submerged in the mountain rocks, the demonic beast rushed over and started to bite her tail. Even with Nightingale's protection, it was impossible to drive away so many enemies. Fran endured the sharp pain and continued to drill for more than 10 meters before she rolled her huge body and crushed all the demonic beasts following her into meat pies. Then she arched her tail and whipped the top of the cave hard, causing the rocks above to collapse and seal the cave entrance. Only then did she get rid of the enemies. As for the witches hiding in her stomach, they had an unforgettable 15 minutes. Just the shock caused by rolling on the ground and whipping the stone wall was enough to make them throw up. Moreover, the storage cavity of the worm carrier was not far away from the digestive cavity, so the smell of vomiting was almost suffocating. Fortunately, everyone was safe and sound in the end. First of all, we have to figure out what happened. Elena looked at Fran and asked, "How did you get trapped here?" "It's probably because of the erosion of the flowing water. The moment I broke through the tunnel, the rock stratum beneath me suddenly collapsed. I didn't even have time to react before I fell into the air. I don't know what hit me, but I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I found myself being carried by a dozen invisible worms and thrown into this place." "I see. They used you as an empty carrier." Elena raised her eyebrows and said, "You're lucky." "I should be glad that I didn't eat you on the spot," Fran muttered. "But when I was about to sneak away, I accidentally glanced at the top of the cave." "Was it really the vigilant magic eye?" Agatha asked in a low voice. "I don't know. The moment I saw it, it also saw me. But that monster was much bigger than the magic eye." The worm sighed, and a gust of fishy wind suddenly rushed over them. Sorry. Elena and the others can't smell it, and I usually don't pay attention to it." "Ahem, it doesn't matter." The ice witch held her breath for a while. "Have you seen its full appearance? After I was tied up, it fell for a while and soaked in the lake of this cave." Fran paused for a moment, as if she was thinking about how to describe it. "I don't know how to describe its appearance. The monster looked like a pile of compressed internal organs with a layer of the eye demon's body on top. The two parts didn't merge into one, as if they were forcibly pieced together. I also saw many tentacles wriggling between the two parts. I don't know whether they were living worms or part of the monster's body, but its internal organs were much bigger than the eye demons. Even the fearful beast of hell can't compare to it." "Is it absorbing demons?" Nightingale frowned and said, "It can't be regarded as a simple hybrid demonic beast, can it? Let's put aside what it is for now. We have to find a way to get out of here." Elena patted Fran's huge mouth and said, "Next time when you encounter this kind of situation, remember to shout attention first before talking about the content. Understand?" "Well," Fran replied in frustration. "Can you still move?" "No." Fran shook her head and said, "I need food to continue to operate this carrier. I've consumed all the food in my stomach during the time we were trapped here." "Can we put our food together?" Lightning asked. "I don't think it's enough for her to go more than 100 steps." Elena took a deep breath and said, "Now we can only wait for reinforcements or take the risk to break out." "Waiting here is also a risk," Agatha said calmly. "The space here is too small. We'll suffocate to death in less than a day. Even if Sylvie can locate us, the army has to defeat those demonic beasts first to save us." She paused and said, "And don't forget that the enemy also has the devouring worm carrier. But if we rush out now, we'll probably be swallowed by the demonic beasts." The gods' punishment witches hesitated and said, And what about Fran? She can't leave with us. If she stays here and is discovered by the enemy, she won't even have a chance to fight back. Anyway, let me go out and check the situation first. Nightingale turned around and seemed unwilling to participate in this dilemma. If you can leave, don't worry about me, Fran suddenly said. Tequila witches are never afraid of sacrifice. Even if I become like this, I'll always be a member of Tequila. By the way, I have something in my stomach that may help you. Then she wriggled her body and slowly spat out several sticky iron boxes from her mouth. This is the stationing supplies that the First Army asked me to carry, Fran said while gasping for breath. They said these things were too heavy to carry, so I swallowed them. Agatha opened the iron boxes one by one and saw shovels, wire netting and other earthwork tools. When she opened the last box, she could not help but be stunned. This iron box was not big, but it was extraordinarily heavy. In addition to being stuffed with shockproof straw, there were also more than 10 neatly stacked wooden boxes. The boxes were labeled with the words Second Chemical Plant, the 64th batch of products qualified. If she remembered correctly, most of the decomposed nitrogen was sent to this plant. Chapter 8:13. You mean this thing is the kind of weapon that can split mountains and split the earth? After listening to the Ice Witch's brief introduction, Elena widened her eyes and said angrily, "Haven't they thought about what if this thing explodes in Fran's stomach?" The worm beside her could not help but tremble. It explodes with a touch. It's a test product in the lab. Agatha rummaged through the iron box and found a bag of copper pipes. She spread it out in front of Elena and said, "If you don't insert these things into the explosive container, they won't react to normal impacts and burns." The other gods' punishment witches immediately became interested. They had heard about the artillery exercise from Phyllis, that is number 76. After moving to the western region of Grey Castle, they had witnessed the First Army fighting against the demonic beasts several times. They were familiar with gunpowder weapons, but this was the first time they had such a close contact with such a weapon. Is it really okay to put it on the fire? It's so loud when it explodes, so it should be very violent. It looks like a brick. How do we use it? Will it explode as soon as we insert the copper pipes into it? Then who dares to use it? Agatha also had a headache. She only knew the general principle of the firearms His Majesty had invented, and was not much better than her tequila compatriots when it came to how to operate them. The one with the red mark is the ignition detonator, which must be ignited in order to take effect. At this moment, Lightning suddenly came over and said with great familiarity, "The blue one is the pull-out detonator. You only need to pull out the string that is wrapped around it to trigger the explosives. The other one with the yellow mark can be detonated by electric current, but it doesn't seem to be in this bag." Agatha was surprised and asked, "How do you know all these?" "Because I'm an explorer." The little girl touched her nose and said, "When the First Army trains and tests new weapons, I usually go to the scene to observe. So should we bury these things at the entrance of the cave and blow up an escape route? Or should we carry Fran and retreat while throwing the explosives behind us?" Elena pondered and said, "If it can block the enemy's pursuit for us, 10 gods' punishment witches should be able to carry Fran. It's okay to leave me here. Say no more. Although we're not afraid of sacrifice, we won't abandon our companions. Don't forget what Lady Eleanor said. Every witch is equally important." The rest of the survivors nodded. "But I'm afraid that neither of these methods will work," Lightning muttered. "If we put it at the entrance of a cave, in such a narrow space, even if we ignite a bag of explosives, it will be enough to tear us to pieces, but if we put it in an empty cave, its power will be much less." The little girl glanced at the shovels on the ground and said, "These are probably tools used by the First Army to blow up caves or block passages. They're not real weapons. If they only rely on flames and airflow, they can probably kill demonic beasts within 10 steps." Everyone could not help but fall silent. If they were dealing with ordinary beasts, just the sound of the explosion would be enough to scare them away. However, the group of demonic beasts was obviously summoned by the dome monster. If they did not kill them all, They would not easily retreat. Maybe there's another way, Nightingale suddenly said. And that is to kill the enemy's leader. You mean, the monster hanging on the top of the cave? Elena frowned. We can't fly. Even if we can fly, it's too dangerous. Before Lightning could answer, Agatha had already said, this is not a defensive battle on the city wall, where there will be backup at any time. It's not unusual for hybrid demonic beasts to have flying species. If Lightning carries a heavy load, her speed and height will be seriously reduced. Once she's surrounded by the enemy, she probably won't even have a chance to rush to the monster. I don't intend to let Lightning go, Nightingale said word by word. I'll personally put this bag of explosives into the monster's mouth, if it has a mouth. You? Agatha was stunned. Are you kidding me? You should know that the ability of mist is useless in front of the magic eye. As long as you can see it, it will definitely be able to see you. It can see me, but it doesn't mean that those demonic beasts can. Even if it orders those demonic beasts to block me, I'm confident that I can break out of the encirclement. She paused. Don't forget, the ability of mist is not only used for hiding. But, when Agatha wanted to say something more, there was a sudden noise of cracking in the rock stratum. It sounded like countless cicadas were gnawing leaves, or the sound of gravel grinding each other. Everyone's expression changed involuntarily. This sound was not unfamiliar to them. Damn it, they really used the devouring worm. Elena's face was as gloomy as water. The enemy is coming. Get ready to fight. A worm carrier was not difficult to deal with, but once its hiding place was discovered, there would be countless demonic beasts pouring in through the worm's abdomen like a tide. Don't worry, no one is more suitable than me for this kind of thing. Before I joined the Witch Cooperation Association, my nickname had spread throughout the entire central region of the kingdom. Nightingale said as she put the 4 bags of explosives into her backpack and firmly tied them to her back. At that time, they all called me the Assassin of the Shadow. Wait. Don't worry, I'll get rid of that ugly guy before the worm breaks through here. Before Agatha could stop her, she had already disappeared without a trace. The last thing she saw was the other person counting his thumbs. In the black and white world, there was no such thing as up or down. As long as Nightingale wanted, she could turn any direction into a flat land. It felt like everything in the world was revolving around her. After passing through the collapsed rubble, she directly jumped over the rock wall and ran toward the cave dome. At this moment, the scene in her field of vision suddenly turned 90 degrees. The monster that was hanging above her head became the target in front of her. The surging underground river was like a ribbon embedded in the mountain wall, and the wide underground lake also rose like a huge window. She saw the monster, or the monster saw her. Nightingale did not avoid her eyes. She stared at the star-like eyes and accelerated. The light emitted by the huge magic cyclone was like a crimson moon, overshadowing the dense spiritual light in the surroundings. This is definitely not a hybrid demonic beast, she thought. In the face of this vast magic power, even Anna could not compare to it. For a moment, Nightingale felt that her consciousness was connected with the thoughts of the monster. It was an indescribable sense of chaos, completely unable to be explained in words. But there was no doubt that whether it was the monster or herself, they both showed naked killing intent to each other. Her lips parted in a grin. The monster also raised its tentacles. Chapter 8:14. Nightingale found that she had guessed correctly. Most of the hybrids were unable to determine her position directly, and there were even fewer that could climb the rock wall to intercept her. Although the flying species that swooped down from the air were quite powerful, they were like arrows that had lost their aim. As long as they maintained their movement, it was difficult to pose enough of a threat to her. The only ones that could see her were the exotic beasts with their scythe-like front claws. They twisted their strong bodies, and the many auxiliary legs on their abdomens pierced into the rocks like nails, allowing them to move freely on the rock wall. Instructed by the monsters, they gathered at the top of the cave, blocking her from the demon eyes of vigilance. These enemies were undoubtedly the first obstacle she had to break through. The vast dome had become Nightingale's battlefield. It had been a long time since she had experienced such a feeling of fighting alone. She used to walk alone under the night sky, taking revenge on the evil nobles. It was not until Vendi found the whereabouts of the Witch Cooperation Association that she was able to escape that kind of life. But the feeling now was completely different from when she was in Silver City. Alone as she was, she did not feel the slightest weariness or resentment. She had not been forced or threatened, but had stepped into this dangerous contest of her own volition. The belief to protect her companions made her heart burn like a flame. Moreover, Nightingale did not feel lonely. She wore a protective suit specially made by Soroya, and her backpack was filled with explosives produced by Agatha. The gun at her waist was personally designed by Roland, and there was a gift engraved on it. To Veronica. All of these made her feel that she was with everyone. As her thoughts churned, the distance between the two sides continued to shorten. The enemies gradually completed the encirclement and pressed towards her with their scythes. There were a total of 16. Nightingale pulled out her pistol and pulled the safety. When the beast at the front was only a few steps away from her, she broke out of the fog and pulled the trigger at the same time. The other party also pounced at the same time. Its powerful tail and auxiliary legs gave it an extremely terrifying explosive speed. This attack was like a predator pouncing on its prey, and it was completed almost in the blink of an eye. It was not so much that the bullet hit it, but rather that it collided with the bullet. Even if it was hit, the remaining force could seriously injure Nightingale. But the latter was prepared. The moment the bullet left the chamber, she retreated into the fog and stepped on a rapidly retreating outline. It was the outline of the earth. The timing was perfect. In the eyes of an outsider, it looked as if she had suddenly jumped back a few meters, but in reality, it was the ground that had brought her flying backwards. Bang! The bullet directly penetrated the sickle beast's sharp head, flipping open its carapace and brain matter like a blooming flower bud. The magic radiance dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the invisible body twitched and revealed its true form. The beast that had lost its vitality fell into the underground lake like a stone, but in her eyes, it was rising quickly, as if it was being sucked into the turbulent lake. Just like that, Nightingale used the unpredictable lines in the fog to chase and kill the enemy on the dome. Even though the strange beasts moved quickly, gravity still put quite a bit of a burden on them, especially when she deliberately lured the opponent back to the battlefield where she had already fought. The rock layer that was riddled with holes clearly couldn't provide enough friction, forcing them to slow down and insert their auxiliary legs deeper into the ground. However, this tactic wasn't without flaws, because she had to leave the fog when shooting and expose herself for a short period of time. More and more evil beasts surrounded her, and the threat of flying species pouncing on her greatly increased. Those deformed monsters with wings no longer blindly launched a dive, but instead hovered closer to the dome, waiting for an opportunity. Once she fired, they would all rush in the direction where they could dodge, forcing her to pass through again, or use the outline to avoid the enemy's large-scale attacks. The battle lasted less than a quarter of an hour, and several wounds had already appeared on Nightingale's body. After all, she couldn't find an ideal place to dodge every time. The changes in the spatial outline didn't depend on the will of an ability user, and the foggy world was also full of danger for her. As a result, the high-intensity battle was a heavy burden on her physical and mental strength. The most serious injury was on her ribs. She couldn't dodge the attacks from the two flying species. Their sharp claws tore her coat from the side of her abdomen to her waist. Fortunately, Soroya's coated protective suit withstood the fatal attack, so she didn't get cut open on the spot. However, the force of the attack still passed through the coating, and she almost couldn't breathe because of the pain. It took her a while to recover her breath. The fact that the manic-demonic hybrids didn't bite each other, and instead cooperated with each other to launch fierce and rapid attacks, showed that they were obviously under the command of the multi-eyed demon. This made Nightingale even more determined to destroy it. Although she didn't know why it hid in the Great Snow Mountain instead of looking for trouble in Neverwinter, once the demonic beasts had a unified leader, it would definitely be a great threat to His Majesty in the future. After all 10 rounds of bullets were used up, there were only 4 sickle exotic beasts left. Apart from the one that was killed by a single shot, the other two fell into the chaotic battle. Judging from the swirling currents on the lake's surface, there was basically no chance of them climbing out after falling in. Besieged by the demonic beasts, Nightingale didn't have time to change the cartridge, nor did she intend to do so. She put the pistol back to her waist, and when a wave of demonic hybrids swarmed toward her, she jumped behind an invisible beast and reached out to pull it into the mist world. When the scene in her field of vision suddenly became black and white, the enemy was obviously a little stunned. Magic power spread from Nightingale's fingertips, dragging a series of enemies that bumped into her into the mist. As the number of demonic beasts increased, her magic power consumption instantly exceeded the critical value and began to decrease rapidly. At this moment, among the countless lines that formed the dome, one of them curled up and flew toward her. She had been waiting for this moment. The more creatures she pulled into the mist, the faster her magic power consumption would be, and the more unstable the mist world would become. Those twisted lines could not only help her jump a few meters, but they could also be terrible weapons. As the white line swept across, the enemy's figure suddenly froze in place. It seemed that they had disappeared into thin air for a very short period of time, and a piece of white land instantly appeared above the dome. But when they reappeared, the scene had become very strange. The lower bodies of the demonic beasts were still where they had disappeared, but the upper bodies had moved several meters away, as if a sharp long knife had neatly cut them in half and carried the severed bodies into the air. Chapter 8:15. Nightingale's vision suddenly widened. The other demonic beasts hesitated after witnessing this shocking scene. They no longer blocked her way like before. Instead, they growled and stood still as if they were afraid of her. These hybrids felt fear. The monster hanging on the top of the cave waved its tentacles and roared furiously. However, its urging had little effect. The only sickle monster that obeyed its command was no longer able to do what it wanted. With only 3 of them left, they could no longer pose a threat to Nightingale. The tight defense line had now become fragmented. No enemy could stop her anymore. Nightingale summoned the remaining magic power in her body and rushed toward the center of the dome. As the distance between them shortened, she finally understood what Fran meant by abnormal. Rather than calling it a creature, it was better to say that it was a pile of exposed organs. It had no skin, no muscle tissue, and its intestines, tentacles, and unnamed organs were stacked layer by layer. It looked ferocious and terrifying. Obviously, it was impossible to throw the explosives into the monster's mouth. Nightingale looked at a wriggling meat sack. Although she did not know whether it was a fatal organ of the monster, its position was at least much deeper than the intestines. Moreover, it was flowing with magic power. When the explosives exploded, it would definitely cause more damage. Although it was a little risky, she did not have the chance to try again. This duel had to be a fatal blow. The closer she got to the target, the more Nightingale could feel the size of the monster. The complicated intestines alone were as thick as a house, and the other organs were piled up like a castle. However, this castle was alive. Seeing that the sickle monsters could not stop her, the monster moved on its own. Countless slender tentacles shot out of its body, trying to stop Nightingale from approaching. Some of the tentacles were like steel whips, and when they fell, they could break rocks into pieces. This kind of attack was not too difficult to deal with. As long as one paid attention to the shape of the tentacles and dodged the breaks that would appear at any time, they could easily penetrate the defense line. The other kind was much more difficult to deal with. A small number of tentacles contained magic power and could exert different abilities. The magic power of different colors was particularly eye-catching in the black and white world. Nightingale did not want to experience the feeling of being hit, so she could only dodge as much as possible by flashing, which was equivalent to increasing the consumption of her magic power. Fortunately, they were not separated by heaven and earth. After a few leaps, she stepped on the strong body of the monster. The monster roared angrily, but because it was afraid of hurting itself, it did not dare to attack wantonly with its tentacles. Nightingale suddenly felt the pressure on her body lightened a lot. She did not hesitate to open her backpack, took out a box of explosives, and rushed straight to the meat sack. The next action was almost in one breath. She pulled out the fuse, stuffed the smoking explosives and the backpack together into the meat sack, and then rotated the misty world, turning the earth into the sky again. Then she suddenly kicked her feet, and her whole body was like an arrow leaving the bow, falling into the turbulent underground lake. The monster also noticed this, but it did not seem to understand why the enemy did not do anything after approaching it by all means, and just left. As for the bag, in its eyes it was not a threat at all. For a moment, it even forgot to chase the witch who was quickly escaping, and all its tentacles froze in place. The most dangerous place in the misty world was the midair, where there was no leverage. Once you hit the contours of the winding airflow, you would be torn apart. Therefore, Nightingale stopped her ability and made a goodbye gesture to the monster above her head. For some reason at this moment, she suddenly thought of Roland. When testing the power of gunpowder, he often turned his back to the testing site, and he even said that a real warrior never looked back to see an explosion. Although this always caused her and Agatha to roll their eyes, he enjoyed it, as if he had completed a ceremony that only he knew. Thinking of this scene, Nightingale could not help but raise the corner of her mouth. But at this moment, she did not want to imitate his appearance. It had nothing to do with whether he was a real warrior or not. She just wanted to see the scene of the monster being blown to pieces. Just when the collision of the lake water and the underground river was clearly heard, the dark top of the cave suddenly lit up with a red light. In the dark underground, this light was not inferior to the dawn. The darkness quickly faded, leaving a long shadow behind everything, and for the first time, the surface of the lake was covered with bright waves. Then there was a shocking roar. In an instant, the whole cave shook. Nightingale clearly saw that under the dazzling fireworks, the monster's body contracted violently, as if it was suffering great pain. The crimson moon that covered the dome suddenly lost half of its body, and some of its organs burst out like a volcanic eruption. The parts closer to the explosion directly ignited, and thick smoke billowed. Splash! Then she fell into the water. The world instantly became quiet, and only the rumbling of her heart could be heard. The high-speed rotating water formed a bottomless black hole under her body, and the huge suction force was like a giant hand, trying to drag her into the abyss. In the face of such power, any struggle was useless. Fortunately, Nightingale was prepared. She released the last bit of magic, summoned the fog again, and then with the help of the hovering white lines, jumped out of the water as if climbing a staircase. At this point, the magic power in her body had been completely consumed, and the side effects of overusing her ability began to appear. Severe throbbing pain and dizziness rushed to her brain, and her limbs could not stop trembling, making her almost unable to control her body. Struggling to climb to the shore, Nightingale did not even have the strength to move. Before her consciousness dissipated, she saw a worm break out of the wall, and then a golden figure rushed toward her. "Nightingale, is she okay?" Fran asked worriedly. "Not a big deal. She just used up her magic power." Agatha roughly examined her and handed her to the God's punishment witches. "You guys carry her, and we'll leave this place as soon as possible." After Nightingale insisted on leaving, they decided that as soon as the explosion sounded, they would rush out to meet her no matter what, in case she was trapped alone. For this reason, all the food was stuffed into Fran's stomach. Although they could not guarantee that she would be able to dig a way out, at least she could crawl with them to the designated campsite. However, the explosion was surprisingly effective. After the explosion, not only did the worm carrier stop moving, but the other demonic beasts also followed it and fled. "Leave it to me." Elena took over the unconscious Nightingale. After this battle, the tequila survivors obviously had more respect for this blonde witch. "Don't you want to give it a few more blows?" Lightning looked at the struggling monster at the top of the cave and said reluctantly, "It looks like it's not completely dead yet." A cornered beast is the most dangerous fight, and you can only bring a box of explosives up there at most. "Don't take this risk," Agatha replied in a low voice. "When the first army gathers, it will die sooner or later." "Well, okay. The little girl hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. Just when everyone was ready to retreat, the monster suddenly let out a cry. With this series of dull and muddy cries, the lake's surface suddenly changed. Under the flickering light, a huge skeleton rushed out of the water and opened up rows of bone claws toward the top of the cave. Even in the turbulent water, it still remained stable. The monster loosened the tentacles that held its body in place and fell straight down from the dome, right into the skeleton. The skeleton suddenly sank, stirring up layers of waves. A large amount of lake water was pushed to the shore, and even the turbulent underground river for a while appeared to reverse. Then the bone claws closed and wrapped the monster like ribs, and then slowly sank into the lake. The moment the burning flames on its body came into contact with the water surface, billowing white smoke rose, emitting a pungent burning smell. The moment it disappeared, everyone saw the densely packed eyes on its body. Even though half of them had disappeared, the remaining eyes did not conceal the intense hatred that was revealed. Chapter 8:16. The demonic beasts ran away. They all ran away. Cheers rang out in the camp. The demonic beasts that had gathered at the entrance of the passage dispersed like a tide, leaving only piles of corpses. The machine gunner released the trigger only to find that his thumb joints were numb from the shock, and the barrel that had not been replaced in time was faintly glowing dark red. According to the shooting regulations, it was obviously scrapped. They look scary, but they're not that good in a fight. They're not as scary as the Church's God's Punishment Army. They're just a group of beasts after all. What nonsense are you talking about, beasts? You take a hunting bow and compete with them? 3 years ago, these beasts stirred up the entire western region. It was His Majesty who changed everything, understand? Yes, yes, Captain. If you have time to celebrate, change the barrel first. Really? Edith stood at the rear of the camp, looking at the busy but orderly soldiers of the First Army with a thoughtful look. Since she followed Roland's army to participate in Operation Tooth Extraction and the Church's resistance, she had been thinking about how to exert the maximum power of firearms if she was in command. There was no doubt that this was a brand new army, completely different from the Knight Regiment and the Mercenary Regiment. It was not easy to forget the glorious experience of leading a charge and relying on excellent weapons and individual bravery to achieve victory. However, when she realized that the Knight Regiment could not compete with the new army, she resolutely abandoned the part of experience that she was good at and turned to carefully observe His Majesty's every move. After today's actual combat verification, she found that her thinking was basically correct. The most remarkable feature of firearms was that they could kill the enemy at a very high efficiency in places that the enemy could not reach, and did not have to consider the problems of distance and physical exhaustion. Therefore, the narrower the shooting range, the more concentrated the firepower. As long as the supply could keep up, they could fight from morning to night without stopping. The front line, which was only enough for 3 or 4 Knight regiments to charge side by side, was crammed with 2 squads of soldiers. The arrangement of 3 machine guns was not because they could not fit more, but because they were limited by the number of machine guns and bullets. Even so, the fierce firepower made it difficult for the hybrids to move forward. They did not need to aim, nor did they need to use physical strength. They only needed to pull the trigger. When the enemies were too densely packed, she even saw a thick mist of blood rise from the entrance of the cave. If His Majesty was in charge, he probably wouldn't be able to do a better job. The only thing she couldn't fathom was the demonic beast's actions. Obviously, some of the enemies had basic intelligence. When they saw that it was difficult to break into the cave, many demonic hybrids began to linger outside the cave. Occasionally they would call out, but they did not move forward. It was as if they were encouraging other demonic beasts to die. But if they had the ability to think, why would they obey the instructions of the strange cry? Demonic beasts, on the other hand, did not need to maintain such a relationship. As long as they escaped into the barbarian lands, they could live on their own, unlike humans, who were unable to live apart from their group. Could it be that there was some kind of connection between the demonic beast and the owner of the voice that she couldn't understand? And that this connection was even above survival? It was hard for her to imagine this. Maybe after the exploration, I'll ask His Majesty Roland for his opinion, Edith thought. Now in Neverwinter, only His Majesty could surprise her, or in other words, make her unfathomable. This kind of unfathomable did not refer to his character, but to his thoughts. Every time she talked with him, she could not help thinking about how broad a person's mind could be. Miss Edith, you've really helped me a lot this time. Brian's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned around and saw that the young officer's face was full of gratitude. When I do the post-war report, I'll definitely report your merits to His Majesty. It's just what I should do. Edith smiled. And I wasn't sure it would work at that time, so you didn't have to mention my suggestion in the report. How can I do that? Brian shook his head repeatedly. His Majesty said that the army is a place that only cares about the results, not the process. A victory is a victory. If I hide your merits because of this, I'll be no different from a thief, and it'll be unfair to you. All right. The Pearl of the Northern Region shrugged. If you insist. Of course. At this point he paused for a moment, then stood up straight and saluted. In addition, I now understand what you meant by trust. The First Army appreciates your suggestion, but I still have a lot of things to do. Please excuse me. Looking at the back of the gun battalion commander, Edith suddenly understood why His Majesty chose a patrol captain of the border post to serve in the army. Merits were the basis for Knight to ask for rewards from the Lord, and it was also the last thing that His Majesty wanted to share with others. As for forgery and lying, there were countless examples, and even her trusted subordinates could not prevent it. Although the details of the First Army were different, in general promotions and rewards were still linked to merits. Moreover, she was not a member of the army, and even if the other side completely concealed this matter, she could not take the initiative to argue with His Majesty. Just for the sake of being fair, he could share the benefits that he could easily reap with others. In fact, this former patrol captain was already more like a knight than most knights. Loyal to His Majesty and upright. That was probably the reason why Roland had entrusted him with such an important task. His commanding ability and knowledge could be cultivated, but it was difficult to change his character. Edith had long noticed this. The spirit and momentum of His Majesty's First Army were completely different from those of the knights in the past, and could be said to be completely new. Perhaps the key to forging this army was to give up the power of the nobles, and only choose the civilians to join the army, coupled with the ideological education mixed in the primary textbooks. And now, she had left her name in the army. Half a day later, Roland received the news that the situation had been alleviated. At this time, the urgent 100 reinforcement troops had boarded the ship and set off, and more reinforcements were also packing up and waiting for the departure order. Even the newcomers of the Witch Union, Annie Brokensword, and the others were ready to support. From City Hall to the First Army, the whole of Neverwinter was on guard, more nervous than when they were attacked by demonic beasts, but in the end, it was a false alarm. The messenger was still Maggie. Looking at the latter's raised head and slightly open mouth, Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. He took out some beef strips from the drawer and sprinkled them on the table, and the latter immediately pecked them happily. Chapter 8:17. In the next 3 days, news about the front line came one after another. When he heard that Nightingale had exhausted her magic power and fainted, his heart tightened. Fortunately, she was fine. When the news arrived, she had basically recovered. She even asked Maggie to tell him not to worry about her. The results of the exploration showed that there was indeed a ruin of the underground civilization in the Great Snow Mountain, but it was not as well preserved as the one in the impassable mountain range. Most of the caves had collapsed, and the remaining compartments were filled with rotten food, insect eggs, and corpses. Not far from the underground lake, the Tequila Witches also found a damaged magic core. There were almost no valuable documents left. The only harvest so far was a primordial carrier and 2 devouring worms. Roland couldn't help but feel surprised. If the multi-eyed monster above the lake was just a beast that happened to treat the ruins as a suitable nest, then there was nothing strange about it. But obviously, the monster was not stupid. It had driven the worms to devour Agatha's laboratory and the Blackrock Tower in Devil's Town. Moreover, it found the strange insect sacks wrapped in demons and humans underground. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed that the monster was deliberately collecting information about the two races. Especially when the first batch of insect sack corpses was transported back, he noticed that the broken skin of the victims was not caused by corrosion, but by the phenomenon of long-term storage. This meant that the corpses in the insect sacks had been there for a long time, and did not look like they were prepared for rations. This behavior of turning other creatures into specimens was obviously something that only intelligent individuals would do. In that case, why did it torment the ruins beyond recognition? Or, the monster did not care about the things that the tequila witches valued. Roland looked at the scene reconstruction photos drawn by Soroya and thought for a moment. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation 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 Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation. As for the lake at the bottom of the ruin, Sylvie had already confirmed its direction. It was a water vein that led to the sea. Based on his current skills, once the enemy escaped into the swirling sea, they would lose their target. The only thing they could do now was to blow up the dome of the ruins and completely seal the underground water vein to ensure the safety of the rear of Neverwinter. Of course, there was some good news. In Lightning's report, Fran was tied up by a kind of reptile, which was the same kind of reptile as the eggworms that wrapped corpses. Under certain circumstances, the mucus in their body seemed to be able to quickly solidify and produce a strong adhesive force, just like the silk of spiders. At the same time, these crawlers had no intelligence and no attack power. Agatha had studied them and confirmed that they did not belong to any species on the fertile plains. In other words, this kind of reptile was probably brought here by the monster. Roland did not care where it came from. What he cared about was the mucus that could solidify quickly. According to Lightning's description, it might even be artificially bred. Therefore, in his reply, he asked Agatha to make a detailed report on the harmfulness, predation range, and living habits of the new species. In addition, he also asked her to collect the strange plants and fungi in the ruin, especially the fruit that emitted a gloomy cold light. He was particularly interested in the giant mushroom that was as big as an adult. Just as Roland was about to look at the wonders of the underground world again, someone knocked on the office door. It was Phyllis who walked in. She bowed and said, "Your Majesty, Lady Pasha wants to talk to you about the ruins." Roland nodded. He would send a copy of all the information he had received these days to Tequila. He also wanted to know what the ancient witches thought about the visceral monsters. "Let's talk through a video conference." Video? What? Phyllis was stunned for a moment, and then quickly realized what he meant. "You mean the Phantom Instrument?" "Yes, the same place, the reception hall on the first floor." Roland could not help but grin. Finally, someone could understand his nonsense. "I see." She also smiled. "I'll inform Pasha now." When he arrived at the hall, Farquhar and the rest who were waiting immediately stood up straight. They placed their hands on their chests and bowed respectfully to him. Their expressions were meticulous and they looked completely different from when they were in their true forms in the dream world. Since he took them to visit the dream world, these gods' punishment witches completely regarded him as a figure comparable to the three chiefs of the Union. Although they still used the term common people when talking about other subjects, they obviously did not include him. This could be clearly seen from their etiquette and attitude. Roland had told them not to pay too much attention to these formalities, but although the gods' punishment witches agreed, they still saluted him as usual, even more seriously than the guards. After a few times he let them be. When he walked into the reception hall, Pasha was already waiting on the other side of the light screen. First of all, I have to express my sincere gratitude to you. She bent her main tentacle and said, whether it was the exploration of the ruins these days, or allowing the gods' punishment witches to regain their lost feelings, your help means a lot to Tequila. In the face of the upcoming battle of divine will, this is also a kind of self-help. Roland responded with a smile. By the way, have you thought about how to recover the carrier in the ruins? There are only two ways. Either directly move the carrier back, or transport the soul instrument there. She paused. I prefer the latter. Once the magic core was turned off, it would be no different from a withered skeleton. It would not be difficult to transport it on a concrete boat, but it would be impossible. Even the unactivated sarcomas and worms were far beyond what ordinary people could accept. The basic education in Neverwinter was not enough for the people to accept these shells that were like monsters from hell. In principle, Roland also preferred the second method, but there was also a problem with transporting the instrument. So have you chosen the witches who are willing to accept the soul transfer? Unlike half a month ago, although the carrier had abandoned its human form and could not be restored, it could regain the long-lost sense of touch, taste, and smell. Therefore, most of the gods' punishment witches were willing, or even eager, to merge with the carrier. This was also the reason why Pasha and the others were so interested in the possible ruins in the Snow Mountain. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.